Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Harvest of Shadows. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the worn fields of my family's farm. I sat on the back porch, the old wooden planks creaking beneath the weight of my memories. It had been nearly a year since I returned home, leaving behind the city life that had grown chaotic and overwhelming. I thought the farm would be a refuge, a place to heal, but I was mistaken. There was something wrong with the land, and every evening, as the sun vanished, a thick tension coiled around me. The wind whispered through the cornfields, a strange rustling that sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled my jacket tighter, recalling how the locals had spoken in hushed tones about the peculiar happenings on the outskirts of town. Old Man Henderson, who had once been a close friend of my father, used to tell me stories of bygone days when the earth seemed alive with secrets. He'd warned me not to wander too far into the woods, especially at dusk. I had always found his warnings amusing, a charming eccentricity of an old man. Now, though, I couldn't shake a sense of dread that settled like a thick fog on the edges of my mind. The first night I heard the sounds, I had brushed them off as nothing more than the usual nocturnal symphony: crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves. But as the night stretched into weeks, those sounds transformed. I began to hear low, guttural growls woven into the whispers of the wind, accompanied by the ethereal crunching of dry leaves underfoot. It felt as if something lurked just beyond my sight, watching, waiting. I tried to immerse myself in the routine of farm life, waking each morning to tend to the crops and animals. Each day was a lesson in monotony, a cycle I thought would ground me. I fed the chickens and checked the fences, but each task felt increasingly surreal, as if I were moving through a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. The farm had once been vibrant. Now, the soil seemed barren, and the air was thick with a disquiet that made my skin prickle. My thoughts were interrupted by the resonating clang of metal against metal. I turned to see my neighbor, Tom, standing at the edge of the property with an expression that was a mix of concern and fear. He waved, and I trudged down to meet him, the chill in the air settling deeper into my bones. "Evening, Maggie," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You hear anything strange at night?" I hesitated, debating whether to admit my fears. "I've heard some noises," I finally conceded. "Nothing serious, I think." Tom's brow furrowed. "It's not just you. Folks around here are talking about it. Cattle going missing, odd tracks found near the woods. Some say it's just coyotes, but," he let the thought linger in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. "Just coyotes," I repeated, hoping to dismiss the unease coiling in my gut. "You can't believe everything people say." He shook his head, his eyes darting toward the tree line where shadows clung like specters. "You should be careful, Maggie. The woods aren't what they used to be." I nodded absently, shifting my weight as I glanced back at the farm. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and purple, but instead of beauty, I felt an aching sense of foreboding. "Thanks for the warning, Tom," I said softly. As he walked away, I turned back to the house. The wind picked up, swirling dust around my feet. It felt alive, as if it carried whispers from the land itself. I locked the door behind me, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. Later that evening, a storm rolled in, dark clouds boiling overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a deep growl that echoed the unease curling within me. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, trying to drown out my fears with the flickering light of the television. The news was filled with reports of strange occurrences across the county: missing pets, odd sightings, each report more bizarre than the last. But it was the final segment that made my heart race. A local farmer had disappeared, his fields left untouched, the livestock in disarray. The police were searching, but there were no leads, nothing but whispers of the woods. I turned off the television, the silence in the room amplifying the beats of my heart. I decided to check the locks on the doors again, just to be sure. Each click sent a shudder through me, as if I were sealing myself into a cocoon. The wind howled outside, and through the cracks of my old farmhouse, I could hear the eerie call of the wild, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. It felt as if the land itself had turned against me. I stared out of the window, the darkened landscape barely visible. Just beyond the reach of my porch light, I thought I saw movement, a flicker, an indistinct shape darting between the trees. My breath caught, and for a moment, I was paralyzed, a sense of dread wrapping around me like a cold hand. Then it vanished. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. Perhaps it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dark. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, lurking just beyond sight, waiting for the night to swallow me whole. As the storm raged outside, I sat on the couch, flooded with a sense of impending doom that felt far too real. The next morning dawned with a heavy mist clinging to the fields, draping them in a shroud of uncertainty. I awoke disoriented, my dreams tangled with the memory of the barn. I could still hear the echoes of the animals, their cries twisting into something more sinister as the darkness deepened. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease that settled over me like a wet blanket. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my brother, Ethan. He had always been a sound sleeper, but that morning he looked restless, his brow furrowed even in sleep. Our parents had insisted we visit our late grandmother's farm for the summer, hoping the countryside would be a remedy for the restless energy of city life. I had promised myself to embrace it, but the unease gnawed at me as I dressed. The kitchen was quiet when I crept downstairs. I poured a cup of coffee and gazed out the window into the misty expanse of the farm. The old barn loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. A sense of dread washed over me. I felt an inexplicable pull to it, as if something were calling me to explore its shadowed corners. After breakfast, I told Ethan I was heading out. He grunted in response, still half asleep, lost in his own world. With each step I took toward the barn, the ground beneath me felt soaked and heavy, the moisture oozing through my shoes. It was a stark contrast to the parched earth back home, where summers baked the ground into cracked earth. As I approached the barn, the wooden planks creaked and groaned, almost like a warning. I hesitated at the entrance, the memories of the previous night flooding back. The air felt different here, thicker, almost electric. I took a deep breath and pushed the doors open, the sound echoing into the darkness within. The barn smelled of mildew and decay, a combination that turned my stomach. Every corner seemed to harbor shadows, flickering in and out of perception. I stepped inside, and the wooden floorboards creaked underfoot. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks, illuminating specks of dust that danced in the air like restless spirits. I felt as if I were walking into a forgotten realm, a place where time stood still and secrets lingered like uninvited guests. I moved deeper inside, my heart racing. The tools hum on the walls, rusted and neglected, stories of labor lost amid the overgrowth creeping in from the outside. I could see traces of my grandmother's life here, the remnants of a woman who had once breathed life into the fields. But now, the barn felt more like a crypt than a home. It was then I heard it, a soft scratching sound, persistent and rhythmic, emanating from the far corner. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity held me frozen in place. I edged closer, the scratching growing louder, more frantic. I glanced around, half expecting to see a creature scuttling through the shadows, but nothing moved. I reached the corner and crouched down, peering into the darkness. The sound was unmistakable now, something was trapped. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to cut through the dimness. The beam landed on a wooden crate, its sides battered and worn. The scratching continued, a desperate plea that sent chills down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky and uncertain. The scratching ceased, replaced by a silence that felt heavy and oppressive. I hesitated, but something within me urged me to open the crate. I reached for the lid, the wood splintering under my grasp as I pried it open. Inside lay an old journal, its pages yellowed and fragile. It felt out of place among the debris, as if it had been waiting for someone to uncover it. I lifted it cautiously, the leather cover cold under my fingers. The journal belonged to my grandmother, and as I flipped through the pages, the familiar looping handwriting brought a sense of nostalgia mixed with dread. Her entries were filled with mundane farm life, planting seasons, animal births, and market days. But as I delved deeper, a darker tone began to surface. She wrote about strange occurrences on the farm, shadows moving without a source, whispers echoing through the fields at night, and animals behaving erratically. My heart raced as I read her words, a sense of terror creeping through me. She had documented not just her life but also a descent into fear, her final entries pleading for help, her sanity unraveling. A sudden noise jolted me from my reading, a crash echoing from the other end of the barn. The journal slipped from my fingers, landing open on the floor. Panic surged through me as I turned, ready to flee. I sprinted toward the exit, my breath coming in quick gasps. As I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. To my terror, the crate was now overturned, the journal splayed open amidst a pile of debris. But it was more than that. The barn felt alive, as if the air itself shifted, thickening with something palpable. My instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the heaviness that pressed down on me like a malevolent force. I fled into the open air, the mist enveloping me as I stumbled away from the barn. I didn't stop until I was back at the house, my heart racing and my mind reeling. The journal lay heavy in my thoughts, its words gnawing at my sanity. I had uncovered something dark, something that connected me to the land and the past. I didn't know if I was ready for what lay ahead, but I had a feeling the farm wasn't done with me yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling cornfield that surrounded the old farmhouse. Shadows stretched long and thin, twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the last remnants of light. I stood on the porch, clutching a coffee cup stained with old ring marks, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue, just like my growing unease about spending another night here. It had been a week since I'd arrived at the farm, a week of broken routines and unsettling experiences. At first, I chalked it up to the seclusion, the oppressive silence hanging over the land like a thick fog. But as the days crept on, I felt something alive in the earth, something that pulsed beneath the surface, awake and waiting. I glanced into the field, its green stalks swaying gently, whispering secrets I couldn't quite decipher. Though beautiful, the corn held an uncanny quality, as if each cob concealed a secret too dark to share. The oppressive stillness enveloped me, and I shivered, a chill creeping up my spine despite the warm summer air. I retreated inside and locked the door, the click echoing in the empty structure. The farmhouse was a maze of unkempt rooms, remnants of a life that had likely flickered out in decay. Dust motes danced in the beams of fading light, and I could almost hear the laughter of children that once filled the air, now replaced by an oppressive quiet. I made my way to the kitchen, the creaky floorboards groaning under my weight. My uncle had left me his old journals filled with sketches and notes, documenting the days he spent on the farm. The further I delved into his writings, the stranger everything became. My mind replayed his words, "The soil remembers. It knows what we've done." A part of me dismissed it as madness born from isolation, but some other part, a growing part, whispered that perhaps he understood something I did not. An urgent knock on the back door startled me, drawing me back from my thoughts. My heart raced as I approached the door, the sound echoing in the silence. I hesitated, unsure whether to open it. I hadn't seen anyone in days. Not even the neighbors from the next farm over. That thought alone sent a shiver racing down my spine. I took a deep breath and opened the door a crack. A man stood on the other side, his face shadowed by the brim of his worn hat. "You live here?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, suddenly cautious. "Can I help you?" He shifted uneasily on his feet, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting eyes to watch from the darkness. "I'm just passing through, but I thought you might need some help. I've seen you out here alone." I stepped back, my instincts flaring. "I'm fine, really." I tried to sound reassuring, but the way his eyes narrowed suggested he didn't believe me. "I wouldn't be too sure about that," he muttered, almost to himself. "Things around here aren't what they seem." I felt the gravity of his words hang heavy in the air. "What do you mean?" "Strange things happen on this land," he said, tension rising in his voice. "The crops, they don't grow just for the harvest. They're not innocent, not anymore." I wanted to scoff, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he spoke truth. The past few days, I heard odd noises at night, crunching footsteps in the fields and whispers that seemed to float with the wind. Every time I thought I was merely imagining it, I'd recall the eyes I felt on my back, the cold prickling sensation that followed me from room to room. Before I could respond, the man turned abruptly, leaving me standing there. "Watch your back, lady. The land is hungry." The door swung shut behind him, and I felt the finality of it, sealing off the brief glimpse I'd had into whatever darkness he had hinted at. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with dread. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder of the hours slipping away. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows as if urging me to listen. I heard something, barely perceptible at first, a low rustling, like something moving through the corn, but it wasn't the wind. I got up, drawn to the window. I peered outside, and my breath caught in my throat. The moon cast a silvery glow across the field, illuminating a figure. It stood still, half obscured by the corn, a dark silhouette against the pale light. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was merely a trick of the moonlight, but the figure did not waver. I grabbed my jacket and crept out the front door, heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped onto the cool earth, the whispers intensified, wrapping around me like an icy grip. My feet moved almost of their own accord, dragging me toward the field. I could feel the pulse of the land beneath me, thrumming like a heartbeat. The figure shifted, and I froze. It seemed to be watching me, waiting. As I moved closer, the corn parted slightly, inviting me into its depths. I hesitated, the instinct to turn back clawing at my mind. But an insatiable curiosity pulled me forward, deeper into the shadows. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices, overlapping and disjointed, urging me to listen. I stepped into the field, the rustling of the stalks mingling with the frantic thudding of my heart. Then, the figure vanished. I stood alone among the towering plants, the moonlight barely piercing the thick darkness ahead. I strained my ears, trying to catch a word among the whispers, but all I could hear was my own breath echoing in the silence. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and a sharp crack echoed through the air, roots snapping, the earth shifting. Panic surged through me. I spun around to run, but the corn seemed to close in, trapping me within its grasp. In the distance, a voice broke through the chaos, clear and haunting. "You should have listened." As the darkness enveloped me, gripping like a vice, I finally understood. The land was not merely watching. It was alive. And it was hungry for something far worse than a harvest. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields. I could feel the chill creeping in as twilight settled over the farm like a heavy blanket. Each moment spent in that suffocating stillness tightened the grip of anxiety around my chest. I didn't want to be there, not after the events of the previous days. But the farmhouse loomed ahead, its weather-beaten exterior appearing more threatening in the fading light. I had decided to investigate the barn, where I had first glimpsed those strange shapes lurking in the shadows. Even now, the memory of the hollow eyes watching me sent shivers down my spine. As I approached, the air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp hay and something else, something metallic. My hands trembled as I pushed open the creaky barn door, the sound echoing like a scream in the silent night. Inside, the darkness swallowed me whole. The faint light from the setting sun barely reached the corners, and I regretted not bringing a flashlight. With each step deeper into the barn, the floorboards groaned beneath me, protesting my presence. I squinted, trying to discern shapes in the dimness, half expecting to see those hollow eyes peering back at me. A rat scurried across the ground, and I jumped, heart racing as I pressed my back against the wall. The air was stale, filled with the scent of decay. I could have sworn I heard a whisper, an indistinct murmur that wrapped itself around my mind like a vine. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. "Get a grip," I muttered under my breath. I had to know what was hiding in this barn. It was the only way to silence the growing fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I ventured further inside, using the dim light filtering through cracks in the wood to guide me. In the far corner, a pile of old, rotting hay caught my eye. Something glistened beneath it. I knelt down, brushing away the decayed remnants of what used to be. As the hay fell away, my heart sank. A small, rusted blade lay there, covered in dark stains. I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't the blade that horrified me. It was the realization that whatever had caused those stains had been very close, too close for comfort. I stood up quickly, panic gripping me as I turned to leave. That was when I heard it again, the whisper, clearer this time, a breathy sound that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. I froze. The voice called out a name, barely audible, but it sent chills racing down my spine. My name. Sarah. I stumbled back, eyes wide, searching for the source. My senses heightened, every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. It was as if the shadows had melted together, taking on a shape. I squinted, trying to pierce the darkness, and then I saw it, a figure, indistinct yet undeniably there, hovering on the edge of the light. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure lurched forward, and I bolted towards the exit, adrenaline propelling me. Just as I reached the door, I felt a cold hand wrap around my wrist, and a voice filled with agony tore through the air. "Don't leave. Please don't leave me." I gasped and tore free, stumbling into the fading light outside. The barn door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing into the vast emptiness of the field. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, the cool evening breeze brushing against my flushed skin. The fear enveloped me, clawing at my insides as I struggled to comprehend what had just happened. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. That voice, it sounded desperate, lost. Had someone died here? Was it tied to the horror surrounding this farm? I had to know. I turned back toward the barn, but the door remained shut, defiant. I hesitated, the echo of that voice replaying in my mind. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to step closer. The shadows seemed to throb with a life of their own as I approached. I had to confront whatever it was, had to know what it wanted from me. I pushed on the door, and to my surprise, it creaked open slowly, reluctantly. The darkness inside beckoned me once more. I stepped in, treading cautiously, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out the silence. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath hanging in front of me like a ghost of its own. "Hello?" I called out, the tremor in my voice betraying my fear. Is anyone here? The whisper returned, more insistent now, wrapping around me like a tendril of smoke. Help me. Find me. I swallowed hard. What do you want? The shadows shifted, and in that moment, I felt something brush against my arm. A fleeting sensation, ice-cold yet electric. Panic surged through me, and instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I stumbled backward, falling to the ground as the whispers crescendoed around me. I lay there, heart racing, staring into the darkness. The figure began to coalesce in front of me, a vague outline that flickered between existence and oblivion. With barely a breath, I forced myself to meet its gaze, those hollow eyes peering into my very soul. Help me, it rasped, a distorted voice of sorrow. I'm trapped. The realization gripped me like a vice. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a plea for rescue, a call for justice that had been buried long ago. I couldn't turn away. I wouldn't turn away. But I didn't know how to help, and the weight of that uncertainty threatened to crush me. As the figure faded back into the shadows, the barn door creaked, swinging shut. I was left alone with the whispers, haunted not just by fear, but by a responsibility I hadn't anticipated. The farm was alive with secrets, and I was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The sunrise had been a pale, ghostly affair, the light filtering through the fog like a frail hand beckoning me outside. I awoke to the sounds of the farm, but they felt different, a dissonance in the usual rhythm of clucking hens and lowing cattle. The air was thick with an eerie silence, an unsettling hush that wrapped around me like an unseen predator. I sat on the edge of the bed, the creaking floor beneath me echoing the tension coiling in my gut. Yesterday had been a long day, one filled with whispers of shadows and the stench of decay that lingered over the barn. I couldn't shake the image of the mouse I had found, its little body twisted in unnatural angles. The memory gnawed at me like a relentless rodent in my mind, leaving me restless and fearful. I thought about the strange figures I had glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, always just beyond reach, like a mirage slipping through my fingers. After dressing in the same slightly tattered jeans and a faded flannel shirt, I stepped outside. The ground was damp underfoot, the dew clinging to the blades of grass, but the sky loomed overhead, heavy and oppressive. I pulled in a breath, the air tasting of earth and something else, something metallic and bitter that sent my heart racing. I had to get to the barn, to face whatever dark cloud hovered over it. As I approached the barn, I noticed the fence that had once been sturdy appeared warped, splintered with jutting out like broken bones. There was a gnawing feeling in my gut. I could sense an unwelcoming presence that seemed to watch me from the shadows. The barn door creaked open at my touch, revealing the dim interior. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the wood, illuminating motes of dust that danced eerily in the air. The silence was deafening. I went inside, stepping past the remnants of old machinery and hay bales that smelled musty and sweet. I reached for the lantern hanging by the door, my fingers trembling as I lit it. The flame flickered to life, casting ghostly shadows that twisted and elongated across the walls. I peered into the darkest corners, half expecting to see eyes staring back at me, but there was nothing, only that dread stillness. I moved cautiously deeper, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the void. My heart raced as I glanced back toward the door. It remained ajar, the outside world still just a whisper away. I had thought yesterday's discovery of the dead animal might be a fluke, but the thought of finding more made bile rise in my throat. What had happened here? Was I even alone? The overpowering smell hit me before I saw it, a rancid, sickening stench that made me gag. I pressed a hand against my mouth to stifle the nausea. The lantern light flickered, casting erratic shadows, and when I drew closer to the source of the odor, I stumbled back. There lay another animal, this one larger and more grotesque than the mouse. It was a rabbit, its eyes hollow and staring, forever frozen in an expression of terror. I felt a cold sweat prick at my brow as I knelt beside it, my hands trembling. I hesitated before reaching out, half expecting it to spring to life. But it was lifeless, mangled in a way that made my skin crawl. I recoiled, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Whoever or whatever was behind this, it was becoming personal. Suddenly, a noise shattered the tension. A scrape, followed by a low growl, resonated from the shadows at the back of the barn. My heart dropped. I was now alone. I clutched the lantern tighter, feebly trying to pierce the darkness, but the beam flickered, playing tricks on my mind. "Hello?" My voice wavered, trembling in the stillness. "Is anyone there?" Silence, then another scrape, closer this time. Adrenaline surged, and I plunged deeper into the barn, each step feeling like a descent into hell. The darkness seemed to pulse around me, a living entity intent on devouring my sanity. The lantern sputtered again, casting erratic glimmers on the walls, illuminating odd shapes, tightly bunched hay, old crates, and something that resembled a shadow twisting against the far wall. I dared to inch closer, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. As I neared, the shadows morphed, revealing a filthy figure hunched low, its face obscured by a matted mass of hair. The stench intensified, a mix of filth and decay, and I felt my stomach churn. "Who are you?" I finally managed to whisper. "What are you doing here?" The figure turned, revealing sunken cheeks and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, voice like the crackle of dry leaves. "This place isn't safe." I took a step back, heart racing, but something in the depths of those eyes reached out, an invitation or warning, I couldn't tell. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The darkness seemed to close in around us, and as I looked back toward the door, a shadow moved, blocking my escape. I was trapped in the barn, surrounded by secrets, and the air grew heavier with the weight of unspoken horrors. The figure advanced, and I felt the world slip away beneath my feet, leaving only the flickering lantern and the endless darkness stretching before me. I had ventured too far into the shadows and was about to find out just how deep they truly went. Story 2, Whispers in the Harvest. The last rays of sunlight slipped behind the distant hills as I drove down the unpaved road leading to my grandparents' farm. It had been years since I visited, far too long for someone who had once spent every summer there. My parents had finally deemed me old enough to take the trip alone, and though I was excited, I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding that settled over me like an unwelcome cloud. The air felt thick as I rolled down the window, the scent of earth and hay mingling with something else I couldn't quite place. As the gravel crunched beneath my tires, memories washed over me like waves of nostalgia, catching fireflies in mason jars, the sweet taste of homemade pie cooling on the windowsill, whispers of ghost stories shared in hushed tones on hot summer nights. But those memories felt distant and tainted, shadowed by a growing unease. I pulled into the driveway, the old wooden farmhouse standing stoically against the twilight. Its paint was chipped and peeling, yet it held a certain charm. The porch sagged, as if tired from years of bearing witness to the life that unfolded within those walls. I parked, stepped out, and was greeted by the familiar creak of the gate. A chill swept through me, one that bore no relation to the fading summer heat. My grandmother appeared in the doorway, her frail frame silhouetted against the flickering light of the living room. "Grandma," I called, waving enthusiastically as I made my way up the steps. She enveloped me in a warm embrace, her familiar floral perfume a comfort against the unease that clung to me. But in her tight grasp, I felt something else, a trembling vulnerability that had not been there before. "It's so good to see you, dear," she said, her voice a soft rasp. "You've grown." I smiled, but it felt forced, a mask for the unsettling thoughts that churned in my mind. I stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and faded memories. The house felt alive, creaking and sighing as if it held its own secrets. We shared dinner, her hands trembling slightly as she served me a steaming bowl of soup. "How's school going?" she asked, her eyes searching mine as if trying to read something I was not ready to share. I told her everything was fine, but the words felt hollow. The atmosphere thickened, silence hanging between us like a thick fog, only broken by the sound of spoons clinking against porcelain. After dinner, I wandered outside to gather my thoughts. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows across the fields. The barn loomed in the distance, its dark outline a stark contrast against the night sky. I had spent countless hours exploring its depths, but tonight it felt different, as if it harbored something sinister. Curiosity gnawed me, and before I knew it, my feet had started moving toward the barn. As I approached, the air turned colder, a bite that seeped into my bones. I hesitated at the door, its weathered wood groaning under the weight of years. The sight of the rusty latch made my heart race. I remembered it being full of life, but now it seemed to exude an ominous energy, as if it had become a prison for lost souls. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It creaked, echoing into the vast emptiness inside. The air was stale, thick with dust that danced in the moonlight filtering through broken boards. I squinted into the darkness, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, a prickle crawling up my spine. The barn was a maze of forgotten tools and old hay bales, remnants of a life that felt foreign to me now. I stepped further inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. As I reached the far corner, something glimmered, a rusted horseshoe, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, brushing off the layers of grime. "Lucky charm," I muttered to myself, a weak attempt to lighten the oppressive atmosphere. But then I noticed it, a low, rhythmic thumping sound, like a heart beating, echoing through the quiet. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively turned toward the source. The sound grew louder, a persistent pulse that seemed to reverberate off the walls, filling the space with an unexplainable dread. I stepped back, heart hammering, and as I did, I glimpsed movement in the shadows, something dark shifting just out of my line of sight. My instinct screamed at me to flee, yet my feet felt glued to the floor. I forced myself to take a step back, then another, the thumping intensifying with each movement. Suddenly, the sound stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I turned and bolted for the door, the darkness pressing in on me. I stumbled out of the barn, gasping for breath, desperate to escape the weight of whatever lurked within. The night air felt like a lifeline as I raced back to the house, the porch light a beacon of safety. I fumbled with the door, nearly tripping over the threshold as I rushed inside. My grandmother looked up, concern etched on her face. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. I could only shake my head, the shadows of the barn still clinging to my mind, the drumming sound echoing in my ears. I didn't know how to explain it, the fear that had taken root in my heart. All I knew was that something was wrong, deeply wrong, and as I glanced back at the darkened silhouette of the barn, I realized I was not alone. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields as I trudged back to the farmhouse. The chill of impending evening seeped into my bones, a reminder of the isolation that had become my constant companion since arriving at my grandparents' old homestead. The farm, though once vibrant and alive, felt more like a sepulchre now, its beauty buried beneath layers of neglect and decay. I had spent the afternoon exploring the property, drawn to the remnants of life that lingered, rusted tools strewn about the barn, old feed sacks, and the skeletal remains of what might have once been a thriving vegetable garden. I felt an unsettling weight in the air, a heaviness that lingered in the corners of my mind. It was like the land held its breath, waiting for something to happen. When I entered the house, I was greeted by the familiar creaks and groans of the old wooden floors. Dust motes danced in the fading light as I made my way into the kitchen. The staleness of the air was thick, mingling with the faint scent of something decomposing. I opened a window, hoping to let in fresh air, but the breeze outside carried an unsettling odor that made my stomach churn. As night fell, I resolved to make dinner. The farmhouse had an old, cast-iron stove that I was eager to use. I rummaged through the cabinets, finding some canned goods that had survived the years, remnants of my grandmother's frugality. The light above flickered as I busied myself, the shadows in the corners deepening with each passing moment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, an unseen presence lingering just beyond my line of sight. After dinner, I settled into the worn armchair in the living room, a spot that faced the large window overlooking the field. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow that highlighted the undulating rows of corn. It was odd how the plants swayed, even though there was no wind. I squinted, trying to make sense of the movement. My eyes widened as I caught sight of something shifting at the edge of the field, an outline that seemed to dart between the stalks. My heart raced as I forced myself to look away. It was just my imagination, I told myself. The stories and legends surrounding this farm, passed down through generations, had buried themselves in my mind. The villagers spoke of things that lurked in the fields after dark, of shadows that moved on their own. I dismissed them as tales meant to scare children, but now I wasn't so sure. As the night deepened, I decided to head upstairs. The upper floor was an echo of the past, old photographs lining the walls, capturing moments frozen in time. I paused at a picture of my grandparents, their young faces radiant with joy. It was strange to think about the lives they led here, the dreams they harbored. The house felt so different now, oppressive and foreboding, like a tomb filled with whispers. At the end of the hallway, I found the door to the attic. I had never been up there before, but a strange compulsion drove me to find out what secrets it held. The door creaked as I pulled it open, revealing a steep staircase spiraling into darkness. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of mildew, and I could almost hear the wood groan beneath the weight of forgotten memories. With a deep breath, I climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. A flickering bulb illuminated the cramped space, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Old boxes and furniture were strewn about, remnants of a lifelong past. I stepped cautiously, not wanting to disturb anything that might be better left untouched. As I rummaged through the boxes, I found trinkets, a porcelain doll with one eye missing, yellowed letters, and weathered toys that had once belonged to my mother. But as I sifted through the decay, something caught my eye. In the corner, half hidden beneath a dusty tarp, was a crate. I approached it slowly, my heart racing with a mix of curiosity and dread. The crate was old, the wood splintered and cracked. I pried it open, revealing a collection of glass jars filled with murky liquids. My stomach turned as I peered closer, recognizing the shapes preserved inside, small, grotesque forms that looked disturbingly human, yet not quite. My hands trembled as I pulled out a jar, the liquid sloshing ominously. What was this? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance as I dropped the jar. It shattered on the floor, the contents spilling out in a sickening mess. The stench was overwhelming, acrid and rotten, and it filled my lungs with an almost palpable terror. I turned to leave, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. As I reached the door, I heard a noise, a whispering sound that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the attic. It was a chorus of voices, rising and falling like the wind. I froze, the weight of their sorrow pressing in on me. "What do you want?" I stammered, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. The whispering intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel it pulling at the edges of my sanity, a desperate plea that echoed through the dimly lit space. I fled the attic, nearly tripping down the stairs in my haste. As I reached the safety of the living room, I slammed the door behind me, gasping for breath. The house had changed. It felt alive in a way I had never imagined. Something was wrong here, something buried deep beneath the surface. I could feel it in my bones, a dread that coursed through my veins. I glanced out the window again, the moonlight illuminating the field. The shadows shifted, twisting and turning as if they were aware of me watching. I knew in that moment that I was now alone, and whatever haunted this farm was just beginning to reveal itself. The sun dipped below the horizon, staining the sky with hues of crimson and indigo. My breath hung in the cool evening air as I stood on the porch, peering into the shadowy expanse of the farm. A low rustle in the cornfield sent a shiver down my spine. I had come to this place seeking solitude, a break from city life, but with each passing day, the unsettling feeling that clung to me grew heavier. Days had turned into a disorienting blur since I had arrived. The farm, nestled far from civilization, had its own rhythm, one that felt distinctly off-kilter. Despite my best efforts to ignore it, the whispering winds seemed to carry murmurs of the past, stories of loss and grief, woven into the very fabric of the land. I had taken to exploring the property, often wandering aimlessly through the fields that stretched out like a golden sea. The corn stood tall and defiant, yet something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just the way the stalks swayed as though they were alive, but the way they seemed to loom over me, watching with unblinking eyes. I had lost track of how many times I'd caught myself staring into the dense greenery, half expecting something to emerge from its depths. That night, I resolved to investigate the barn. An old relic of a time long gone, its weathered wooden beams sagged under the weight of decades. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, the hinges protesting like a ghostly warning. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and I took a deep breath, inhaling a mix of musty hay and something I couldn't quite identify. With each step inside, my heart raced. The barn was a graveyard of forgotten tools, the remnants of a life I had never known. Old farming equipment lay abandoned, rusting under layers of dust. And then there was the smell, the unmistakable odor of decay. I wrinkled my nose and pressed forward, curiosity driving me. As I ventured deeper, I stumbled upon a small door at the back of the barn, barely ajar. It seemed out of place, as if hiding something crucial. I hesitated, every instinct urging me to turn back, but a morbid curiosity pushed me onward. I nudged the door open wider, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that spiraled down into an abyss of shadows. I descended slowly, each creak of the wooden steps echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. The air grew colder, heavy with anticipation. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit cellar. The low ceiling felt oppressive, and the walls were lined with jars filled with murky liquid and something unidentifiable floating within. Preserved remnants of the farm's past, I realized, and the sight made bile rise in my throat. Then I saw it. In the far corner, a shape shifted beneath a dusty tarp. My heart raced as I approached, trepidation gnawing in my insides. With trembling hands, I lifted the edge of the tarp to reveal a collection of old farming implements, but they were unlike any I had seen before. Jagged and grotesque, these tools seemed to have been designed for purposes far removed from agriculture. I recoiled, the metallic shine glinting ominously in the dim light. The air felt thick and charged, as if the cellar itself held its breath. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a soft scuttling sound that sent my heart into my throat. I spun around, scanning the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. Silence answered, wrapping around me like a vice. Then I heard it again, the scuttling, now closer. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint its source. I took a tentative step backward, ready to flee, when a figure emerged from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled against the wall. It was a wild-eyed man, dirt-streaked and ragged. He stumbled toward me, an unsettling grin stretching across his face. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice hoarse and choked with something sinister. Not in the dark. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Just a watcher, he replied, eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone else. You don't understand what lies beneath this land. It'll take you. Panic shot through me. I turned, my instinct screaming at me to escape. As I scrambled toward the stairs, he lunged forward, grasping my wrist with a grip that felt like iron. Listen, he hissed, breath hot against my face. You think you can leave? The farm doesn't let go. It remembers. They always come back. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free, bolting up the stairs. My heart thundered in my ears as I burst out into the open air, the cool night enveloping me like a shroud. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the cornfield, my legs trembling beneath me. As I stood there, gasping for breath, dread coursed through me. The man's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the soft murmurs of the corn. I felt its gaze upon me, an entity that had been lying in wait, hungry for my fear. Above me, the moon hung heavy and watchful, illuminating the rows of corn that stretched out like a labyrinth. I had entered this farm seeking peace, but I had awakened something far older and more sinister than I could comprehend. And as the shadows loomed around me, I realized with chilling certainty that I was no longer alone. The morning light seeped through the gaps in the wooden shutters, casting uneven patterns on the floor. I lay awake in the thick silence that enveloped the farm, my heart still racing from the events of the previous night. The sun had barely risen, but the air felt oppressive, as if the earth itself held its breath in anticipation of the day to come. I rolled out of bed, the creaking floorboards beneath me echoing my unease. My stomach twisted in knots. I hadn't eaten a proper meal since arriving at the farm, and the gnawing hunger only added to my anxiety. I padded softly down the hallway, past the cold, empty rooms that whispered of past lives and forgotten dreams. In the kitchen, the remnants of last night's supper lay abandoned on the table. A half-eaten loaf of bread and some wilted greens were all that remained. With trembling hands, I poured myself a glass of water, my reflection distorted in the glass. I looked more like a ghost than a person, pale and haunted. Ignoring the roiling sensation in my stomach, I grabbed a piece of bread and took a tentative bite. The stale crust scraped against my throat as I chewed, the flavor bitter and dry. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the thoughts of that place at the barn, the strange noises, and the brush of something unnameable against my skin. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, shattering the morning stillness. I dropped the bread, my heart skipping a beat. I rushed to the back door, the old wood creaking under my weight as I flung it open. The sun blazed bright, stark against the dark shadows that clung to the corners of the yard. The source of the noise came from the barn. I squinted against the light, my throat dry as I hesitated at the threshold. The barn had always stood ominously in the distance, but now it seemed to loom larger, as if it had a life of its own. The door hung ajar, swaying lightly in the breeze, and I caught a glimpse of movement within. An irrational fear gripped me, but curiosity clawed at my insides. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay, and stepped forward. Each footfall felt heavy, the ground beneath me solid yet unyielding. As I approached the barn, I noticed the strange marks on the door, deep scratches, as if something had clawed its way out or in. I paused, my breath hitching in my throat. The memory of the voices from the night before flickered through my mind, chilling me to the bone. Just the wind, I whispered to myself, forcing a shaky laugh. But even I didn't believe it. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dim, filled with shifting shadows that danced along the walls. I fumbled for the light switch, but remembered it had been broken for ages. Instead, I moved cautiously inside, feeling the air grow heavier with each step. The first thing that struck me was the smell. It was a mixture of moldy hay and something far worse, something rancid and sweet. I wrinkled my nose, instinctively taking a step back. But the barn called to me, a siren song that I couldn't ignore. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I began to make out the outlines of various tools and implements scattered about: shovels, harnesses, and empty feed buckets. But it was what lay at the back of the barn that made my heart seize. There, in the far corner, was a pen. It was small and almost entirely empty, save for a few old, rusted troughs. But something caught my eye, something moving within. I squinted, my pulse quickening as a shadow shifted beneath the dim light filtering through the cracks in the wood. My breath caught as I stepped closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't quite suppress. Then I saw it. A figure, curled up in the straw, half hidden and shivering. It looked human, but there was something unnatural about it. My heart raced as I finally mustered the courage to call out, "Hello?" The figure froze at the sound of my voice, and in that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The silence that followed felt like a living thing, wrapping around me, heavy and suffocating. I took a hesitant step back, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on me. "Who's there?" A raspy voice emerged from the shadows, sending a chill racing down my spine. It was a voice that belonged to someone long lost, someone haunted by their own demons. I was rooted to the spot, unable to flee. I'm just exploring," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Exploring?" the figure replied, laughter bubbling in its voice, but it wasn't the kind that brought comfort. It was a sound filled with madness, a sound that promised nothing but sorrow. "You shouldn't be here." In that instant, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance, echoing my own turmoil. I turned to leave, but my feet felt glued to the ground, trapped by fear and an unseen force. "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. The figure in the shadows shifted, revealing a gaunt face, sunken eyes that glowed with a strange light. "To be free," it answered, the words echoing in the vast emptiness of the barn. "Are you willing to help?" I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to run. But the weight of its gaze bore down on me, and I felt a strange compulsion, a need to understand, to uncover the truth behind the madness of this farm. I don't know," I whispered, fear coursing through me like ice. The figure smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too jagged. "Then you'd better make up your mind, because the storm is coming, and it won't wait for anyone." Just then, the barn door creaked, swinging shut with a force that rattled the old wooden beams. Darkness enveloped me, and I was left alone with the thing that wasn't entirely human, trapped in a space where time and reality seemed to twist and bend. The air grew thick with tension, and I knew I had crossed a line from which there might be no return. I awoke to the sun filtering through the grime-coated windows of the farmhouse, casting an eerie glow across the wooden floorboards. The events of the previous night flooded back to me, each moment more surreal than the last. I could still hear the echo of the wind howling outside, mingling with the strange noises that had invaded my mind like an unwelcome visitor. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and sat up, feeling the weight of dread settling on my chest. The heavy air in the room felt oppressive as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I had to know if the cellar door was still locked. If not, I might be tempted to return to that dark abyss that had held me captive. I tiptoed past the tattered curtains, the fabric fraying at the edges, and made my way to the stairs. The wooden steps creaked beneath my weight, each groan a reminder that the house, like me, was deteriorating. Once I reached the bottom, I hesitated. The daylight struggled to penetrate the gloom of the living room, and I could hear the faint rustle of something stirring outside. I grabbed a rusted flashlight from the counter, my only source of comfort, and flicked it on. The beam flickered, momentarily illuminating the dust motes hanging in the air like ghosts. I approached the cellar door cautiously, my heart racing. The heavy wooden door stood ominously ajar, as if taunting me with the memories of what lay within. I needed to confront it, to put my fears to rest. With a deep breath, I pushed the door wider and descended the creaking steps into the darkness. The musty scent of earth and decay filled my nostrils, a stark reminder of the secrets hidden away down here. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness as I scanned the room. The old shelves sagged under the weight of dust-covered jars, their contents long since lost to time. But it was the far corner that drew my gaze, where shadows danced and flickered in the light. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. As I neared, I noticed something half buried beneath a tattered burlap sack. With trembling hands, I peeled it back, revealing a rusted metal box. The lock was broken, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I hesitated, then lifted the box's lid. Inside lay a few scraps of yellowed paper and an array of odd trinkets, a small, carved figure resembling a goat, a tarnished silver locket, and what appeared to be a clump of hair tied with a fraying ribbon. My breath hitched in my throat as I picked up the locket. I pried it open, and my heart sank. The photograph inside was of a young woman with hollow eyes, sadness etched across her face. Underneath, in delicate script, were the words, "For Lila, always." Lila. The name echoed through my mind, conjuring fleeting memories of whispered conversations and dim laughter. I had overheard my mother mentioning Lila as a child, a friend who had once lived on this very farm. I had always sensed a heaviness in those stories, but I was too young to understand. A sudden noise startled me. The floor above creaked as if someone had walked across it. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but curiosity held me captive. I shoved the box back under the burlap and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top, I paused, listening intently. The house felt alive with sounds, with groaning, wind rattling against the window panes, but there was an unmistakable rhythm beneath it all. A thumping, like a heartbeat, pulsing through the walls. I edged toward the living room, where the sound seemed strongest. The front door swung open with a gentle creak, revealing a figure standing in the sunlight. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered overalls. His face, obscured by a white-brimmed hat, gave him an air of foreboding. "Who are you?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper, but he didn't reply. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the threshold. There was an unsettling familiarity to his presence, an echo of a nightmare I couldn't quite grasp. As he approached, I could see the lines etched deep into his skin, a map of sorrow and toil. I felt a pang of recognition, but before I could place him, he raised his hand, revealing a wooden stick stained dark with age. A shiver ran down my spine as a sudden surge of fear overcame me. "Stay back!" I shouted, stumbling backward. The thumping grew louder, and the ground beneath my feet trembled, as if the house was responding to my fear. The man paused, tilting his head slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were vacant, like 2 empty wells. "Lila," he murmured, and the name fell heavy in the air, hanging there like a curse. My mind raced, battling between the urge to escape and the need to understand. "What do you want?" I breathed, my heart racing. But he didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the stick and pointed it toward me, and I felt the chill of something ancient and unyielding wash over me. The air became electric, and the shadows in the room seemed to pulse and writhe, closing in around me. In that moment, I realized I had trespassed into something far darker than I had ever imagined. The stories I had dismissed as mere folklore were rooted in a truth I was now tangled in, a web of sorrow, loss, and haunting memories that had seeped into the very walls of the farm. The man began to move toward me, the shadows gathering behind him like a storm. I turned and bolted for the back door, the sensation of being watched prickling at my skin. I had to get away, had to escape the horrors that lay hidden in that house. The pulse of the farm became an echo in my ears, urging me onward as I raced into the fading light of day. Story 3: Shadows over the fields. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the harvested corn stalks. I remember the late fall that year. It was uncommonly warm for November, but the air carried a heaviness that hinted at something wrong. Our family farm, once a thriving homestead, now felt more like a ghostly relic of an era that had passed. The crops had withered, the barn's paint peeled with neglect, and even the animals had taken on a silence that was unsettling. My father had grown quiet in the months leading up to that fateful day. I could see the concerns etched into the lines of his face, his eyes clouded with worry as he spent hours staring out at the fields. At dinner, he would sit across from me, picking at his food as silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, until my mother's gentle prodding would force him to speak, if only to shrug off the unease that settled over the table like a dark cloud. It was just before Halloween when everything began to unravel. I had gone out to the barn to fetch a lantern, my heart racing with excitement as I considered the small party we had planned. A few friends from the nearby town were coming over to help with the harvest, and I was determined to make a night of it. Yet, as I wandered through the dim, cavernous space, I felt a disquiet settle in my bones. The barn had always been my refuge. I had spent endless hours within its walls, climbing the hay bales, playing with the goats, and even hiding from my chores. But that evening, the light from the dying sun barely penetrated the gloom, and the shadows seemed to crawl across the floor towards me. I swallowed hard, dismissing the sensation as a figment of my overactive imagination. I grabbed the lantern from its hook, pushing aside the reluctance that gnawed at my mind. As I stepped back outside, the air felt different, charged with a kind of electricity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on the night ahead. I would even brush off the unease as I set up the bonfire in the backyard, my friends soon arriving with laughter and excitement. But as night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The sound of crackling fire and jovial voices filled the air, yet in the periphery, I glimpsed movement among the trees that bordered our property. I couldn't tell if it was just the shadows playing tricks or if something truly lurked among the gnarled branches. I had almost convinced myself to laugh it off when one of my friends, Sarah, pointed toward the woods. "Do you guys ever feel like something's out there?" she asked, her voice light but with a tremor of sincerity. We all chuckled, dismissing her words as mere fun, yet the laughter felt hollow. We settled around the fire, sharing ghost stories, but the tales only heightened the charge in the air. Each whispered story grew darker, my heart racing as I cast furtive glances toward the woods. The wind rustled through the trees, producing a sound akin to whispers. I focused on the flames, watching them dance as I clenched my fists to suppress the growing dread. Not long after, something shifted in the darkness. A rustle, louder this time. My skin prickled as I turned my head toward the sound, my heart pounding. I saw a figure, faint and indistinct, slipping between the trees. It moved with a fluidity that felt unnatural, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed, my voice rising above the laughter that had resumed around the fire. "What? What did you see?" Tom, one of my friends, asked, his brow arched in mock concern. I hesitated, fear clawing at my throat. Something in the trees. It was there. But as I described it, my confidence dwindled. The laughter began again, their eyes sparkling with mischief rather than fear. I felt a flush of embarrassment wash over me, and I pushed the incident aside, hoping it would disappear like the figure had. As the evening wore on, I convinced myself it was just the overactive imagination of a teenager, fueled by ghost stories and the chill of the night. But just as I was settling into that notion, a sudden chill swept through the air, extinguishing the comforting warmth of the fire. The flames flickered, and for a brief moment, I caught sight of the figure again, this time closer, just beyond the edge of the light. "Guys," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I really think we should go inside." The laughter faltered, and a silence fell over the group. They exchanged glances, and without needing to say anything, I felt the tension tickle at the back of my neck. Tom was the first to break the silence, though his voice held no mirth. "Something's not right, is it?" Just then, a low rumble echoed through the night, a sound that vibrated through the ground beneath us. It was a noise I'd never heard before, deep, resonant, and oddly animalistic. My instinct screamed at me to run, but fear rooted me in place. And then, a piercing shriek shattered the air, a sound that seemed to claw at my very soul. It echoed from the depths of the woods, a desperate, agonizing cry that sent us scrambling backward. I turned my gaze toward the darkness where the figure had vanished, my heart racing as I realized the night was far from over. Something was out there, and it was coming for us. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a dusky glow over the fields that surrounded the farmhouse. I stood on the creaking porch, a chill creeping up my spine as the shadows grew long and deep. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wilting crops, a heavy reminder of the farm's recent misfortunes. My heart pounded in my chest, each thump echoing in the stillness as I peered into the encroaching darkness. After the strange events of the previous night, the frantic scratching at my window, the unsettling feeling of being watched, I had convinced myself that I would find a way to shake off the fear. Yet, as twilight settled in, I found my imagination running wild. I took a deep breath, attempting to calm myself. Perhaps it was just my nerves, left over from the unsettling tales I had heard about this place. The townsfolk had whispered of disappearances over the years, of livestock turning up mutilated, and of shadowy figures lurking in the fields. I had brushed these warnings aside, convincing myself that I was above superstition. But the way the light faded now, casting the barn into a deep abyss, made me question my resolve. A sudden rustle broke the oppressive quiet, and I turned sharply, squinting into the lengthening shadows. My heart dropped when I saw something move just beyond the tree line, a figure, dark and indistinct, flitting between the trunks like a wisp of smoke. I blinked, and it vanished. "Get it together," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. I was being ridiculous. I was here to help my uncle with the farm, not to indulge in fears that belonged in a forgotten storybook. Yet as I turned back toward the house, the feeling of unease stirred in my gut. Dinner was quiet, the air laden with unspoken tension. My uncle sat across from me, his face worn and gaunt, the lines of worry etched deeper than ever. He glanced at me occasionally, as though gauging my response to the oppressive atmosphere, but said nothing. The clinking of silverware against the plates echoed off the walls, louder than it should have been. "What was that noise last night?" I finally asked, breaking the silence that hung between us. He dropped his fork, the metal clattering against the ceramic. His eyes darkened. "What noise?" "The scratching at my window. It woke me up." I watched his face, searching for any sign of recognition. He hesitated, his gaze flitting to the window before he looked back at me. "Just the wind, probably. This old place makes all sorts of sounds." But it sounded. "Just the wind," he interrupted, his voice firm. It left no room for further discussion. I nodded, deciding it was better to let the matter rest, but as I finished my meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. After dinner, I excused myself, needing space to think. I wandered toward the barn, drawn by an inexplicable urge to explore the shadows within. As I stepped inside, the smell of hay and musk enveloped me, but the darkness felt heavier here, as if something ancient lingered in the corners. I fumbled for the light switch, feeling the cold metal beneath my fingers. A buzzing flicker illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the walls. My uncle had mentioned a few repairs that needed to be made, but the barn's disrepair seemed to echo the state of the farm itself. Old tools lay scattered about, and the remnants of a long-abandoned project loomed in the corner, a half-assembled tractor, its rusted frame like a skeleton. My eyes scanned the room, uneasy despite the mundane surroundings. I stepped further in, the wood creaking beneath my weight. Suddenly, a loud thud resonated from the loft above, and I froze, my heart racing once more. It sounded as if something had fallen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the cavernous space. No reply came, only the echo of my own uncertainty. The barn felt alive somehow, its wooden structures creaking and groaning as if in protest to my presence. I took a cautious step towards the staircase leading up to the loft. Each step felt monumental, the air thickening around me. When I reached the top, I hesitated, peering into the darkness. A sliver of moonlight broke through a cracked window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. There, at the far edge of the loft, something glinted, a small shard of glass. I approached it, wary of what I might find. It was then that I noticed the floorboards were smeared with something dark, mud, perhaps, or something more sinister. My stomach twisted, a cold dread flooding my veins as I knelt to inspect it. A low growl resonated from below, halting my breath and sending a tremor through my limbs. My heart thundered as I scrambled to my feet, looking over the edge of the loft. Darkness engulfed the barn, but I could just make out the shifting shadows below. Fear clutched at my throat as I backed away, hoping to find a safe retreat. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft yet insistent. "Help me." The voice slipped through the cracks in my mind, chilling me to the core. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the wooden stairs as I fled into the night, the sounds of the barn consumed by the darkness behind me. I burst into the cool air, the night sky sprawling above, but the sense of dread still clung to me. As I stood outside, gasping, a sudden realization pierced through my fear. I hadn't imagined the voice, the barn held secrets, and I was only beginning to uncover them. But in this place of shadows and whispers, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay hidden was far more dangerous than I had anticipated. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn's weathered wooden beams. I shuffled through the remnants of my dreams, the unsettling images still clinging to me like cobwebs. The echoes of last night's whispers haunted my thoughts, a dissonant melody that played on a loop inside my head. Every fiber of my being wanted to dismiss them as mere figments of an overactive imagination, but the chill that lingered in the air told me otherwise. As I stepped outside, the familiar scent of damp earth mixed with the sharp tang of hay. I could hear the distant sounds of the farm coming to life, the clucking of chickens, the lowing of cows, and the wind rustling through the corn stalks that bordered our property. Everything appeared normal, yet a sense of dread settled heavily in my chest. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the tasks ahead. After breakfast, I headed toward the barn. The wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the dim interior. Sunlight trickled through the cracks, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. The hay bales were stacked high, casting shadows that danced playfully across the floor. But I knew better than to be deceived by appearances. A feeling of foreboding clung to me, intensifying with each step I took inside. I grabbed a pitchfork and began to tend to the animals, but my mind was elsewhere, lingering on the fleeting whispers I had heard the previous night. I wondered if my brother, Caleb, had experienced anything similar. He had always been more in tune with the land, with its rhythms, yet this added layer of unease seemed to escape him. While mucking out the stalls, I noticed that the cows were agitated. They moved restlessly, their eyes wide, fixated on something in the shadows of the barn. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I turned to follow their gaze. The space seemed to darken in that moment, as if the sun had suddenly hidden behind a cloud. "Come on, girls," I muttered, trying to coax them back to calm. But their low moans only seemed to intensify, as if they sensed a presence I could not. I dropped the pitchfork and stepped closer, curiosity piqued despite the fear gnawing my stomach. I peered into the darkness, straining my eyes to discern any movement. Nothing appeared amiss, yet the sensation of being watched enveloped me. I recalled the stories my grandfather used to tell, tales of restless spirits who roamed the fields, bound to the land. My heart raced as I considered the possibility that we had awakened something dormant in our efforts to till the soil and plant our crops. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the barn, reverberating off the walls and causing me to jump back. I turned, heart pounding, as a shadow darted past the far wall, barely visible in the gloom. My breath quickened, and I summoned every ounce of courage to approach the source of the noise. As I rounded the hay bales, I found myself face to face with the source. A large wooden crate lay toppled, its contents scattered across the floor. I knelt to inspect the mess, my mouth going dry as I recognized the contents: old farming tools, rusted yet familiar. Among them lay a shovel, the blade stained with darkened earth. I swallowed hard, recalling the local folklore about the land beneath our feet, stories that hinted at secrets buried just out of reach. What had my family unearthed in their endless toil? I picked up the shovel, its weight grounding me momentarily. With it in hand, I felt an odd compulsion to dig. But the moment I tightened my grip, that same sense of foreboding returned, wrapping around my heart like a vice. I dropped the shovel as if it had burned my skin, deciding instead to leave the barn and clear my head. Outside, the air felt different. The sun had risen higher, yet shadows clung to the corners of the property. I spotted Caleb at the edge of the cornfield, his brow furrowed as he inspected the plants. I approached him, eager to share my concerns. "Hey, you notice anything strange?" I asked, trying to gauge his response. He looked up, a hint of confusion in his eyes. "Strange how?" "Just, the animals seem off." And last night, I hesitated, weighing the validity of my fears. I heard voices. Caleb's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features before he shrugged. "You're just getting used to the quiet out here. It can mess with your head." His dismissal stung, but I nodded, trying to mask my disappointment. I returned to the barn, though dread gnawed at me. I spent the afternoon cleaning and organizing, but the unease only deepened. Every creak of the wood, every rustle from the shadows, felt like a whisper calling me deeper into the unknown. As dusk began to settle, I grabbed the lantern, its warm glow barely penetrating the growing darkness. I hesitated at the barn door, every instinct screaming at me to stay away. But I had to confront whatever lingered there, whatever voice had reached out to me beneath the weight of the night. I stepped inside, the lantern illuminating the familiar space. But something was different now. The air felt heavier, almost electric, as if charged with anticipation. I placed the lantern on a hay bale, its flickering light casting ghostly shadows along the walls. Then, I heard it again, a soft whisper, weaving through the stillness. It was unmistakable this time, a low murmur that curled around my thoughts, curling deeper into a part of me I didn't recognize. "Help me," it breathed, each word laced with desperation. I froze, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. Silence met my question, but the whisper persisted, growing louder, more insistent. "Help me." In that moment, I understood. The land held its secrets tightly, and I was only beginning to unravel them. I felt the chill of fear creep down my spine as I realized that the voices were not simply echoes of my imagination. They belonged to something real, something that had been waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to dig deeper. It was time to see what lay buried beneath the surface. The morning sun broke through the remnants of the storm, casting long shadows across the fields that stretched endlessly around the farmhouse. I stood at the edge of the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching as mist clung to the ground like a shroud, reluctant to dissipate. I had learned to appreciate the tranquility of dawns in this isolated place, but today, an unsettling feeling prickled at the back of my mind. It had been 2 days since I first noticed the unusual occurrences, the strange movements in the barn, the whispers that seemed to float on the wind. Each night felt heavier, as if the darkness carried secrets I was too afraid to uncover. The locals had warned me about this land, about the old stories of farmers who had gone mad or the livestock that would inexplicably vanish, but I had dismissed them as mere folklore, born out of superstition and fear. As I sipped the bitter brew, my gaze drifted toward the barn, its weathered wood seeming to pulse with a life of its own. I had promised myself I would investigate it today, push through the unease that had settled into my bones. The hesitation nagged at me, but curiosity, that insatiable beast, clawed at my resolve. I set my cup down on the porch railing and stepped off the creaking boards, the damp earth squelching beneath my worn boots. Each step toward the barn felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted my movement. The air was thick, not just with fog but with an oppressive tension that made my skin prick. The barn loomed closer, its door slightly ajar, creaking gently as the wind taunted it. I hesitated, my heart pounding a reckless rhythm in my chest. What was it I expected to find? I had already dismissed the shadows I had seen darting past the windows, the flickering lights that had illuminated the building at odd hours. Yet every instinct urged me to turn back. Gripping the door, I pushed it open. The hinges groaned, a sound that echoed in the vast emptiness. Inside, the smell was sharp and stale, a mix of hay and something far more acrid. As I stepped over the threshold, the weight of silence pressed down on me, almost suffocating. I peered into the cavernous darkness, the slatted walls filtering the remaining light into thin, fragile beams. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, yet I ventured deeper, moving past the rusted tools and forgotten equipment. My eyes adjusted, and in the dim light, I spotted something unusual, a pile of hay in one corner, oddly disturbed, as if something had burrowed beneath it. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering louder with each step. As I knelt beside the pile, the underlying fear twisted in my gut. I pulled away the hay, revealing a small opening, just big enough for a child. My breath hitched as I peered inside, my mind racing with horror at what might lurk beyond. Just a glimpse, I told myself. Just see what it is, and then you can leave. I leaned closer, the smell of earth and decay overwhelming my senses. It was dark in there, but I could make out shapes, long and sinewy. My heart sank as I discerned what appeared to be the remnants of something. Bones. Small, fragile bones, twisted and cracked, scattered among the hay like discarded memories. My pulse quickened, and a chill ran down my spine. This was no place for me. Suddenly, a noise, a scrape, sharp and jarring, made me jump back. My eyes darted around the barn, but I saw nothing. The shadows danced, deepening in the corners, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I turned to leave when I heard it again, a soft whimper, almost human. Panic surged as I peered into the darkness, seeking the source of the sound. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling as it broke the silence. "Is someone there?" The whimpering grew louder, more distinct. I hesitated, my instincts battling against the urge to run. I had to know. I stepped deeper into the barn, moving toward the sound. As I drew closer, the whimper transformed into a raspy call, a voice. It was weak, desperate. "Help me." The words clawed at me, an unholy plea. My throat tightened. I reached the far wall, where the shadows pressed even heavier. There, partially hidden behind a stack of old crates, was a figure. I froze. It was a woman, dirty and disheveled, her eyes wide and frantic as they met mine. Before I could speak, she stretched a hand toward me, trembling. "Please, help me," she gasped again, the desperation in her voice seeping into my bones, compelling me to act. I took a step forward, heart racing. "Who did this to you?" I breathed, scanning for any sign of threat. But she didn't answer. Instead, her eyes darted past me, filled with terror. I turned, and that was when I saw it, a darkness shifting behind me, coalescing from the very shadows of the barn. Something breathed in the still air, its presence palpable, a cold dread that seeped into my veins. The woman's hand fell to the ground, her eyes widening in horror. "Run!" she screamed. But it was too late. I felt the darkness envelop me, pressing against my chest, stifling my breath. I turned to flee, but the shadows closed in, swallowing me whole. The last thing I heard was her voice, fading into the abyss as I fell into the dark. The sun sank below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the fields that seemed to stretch infinitely. Each evening felt like a shroud enveloping the farm in an unsettling stillness, but tonight, the air held a palpable tension. I could feel it prickling at the back of my neck, a warning that something was amiss, an instinctual response honed from days spent in the company of the cursed land. I had resolved to venture out after dinner, armed only with a flashlight and an old, rusted pitchfork. The stories of the farm's dark past weighed heavily on my mind. Nathan, my older brother, had always told me about the disappearances of locals who had ventured too deep into the woods and never returned. Their names echoed in the quiet, reminders of lives snuffed out by whatever malevolence lurked in those darkened corners of the property. As I stepped outside, the chill of the evening wrapped around me like a cold blanket. The moon hung high, a pale specter illuminating the path ahead. Each footfall on the old gravel crunched like a whispered secret, the sound magnified in the thickening silence. I made my way towards the barn, which stood ominous and shadowy against the sky, its weathered planks groaning like a tired beast. Inside, dust motes danced in the moonlight that filtered through the cracks, and the scent of hay and decay mingled in the air. I flicked on the flashlight, cutting through the darkness, revealing the remnants of farm life that had been swallowed by neglect. Old tools were discarded, their rust a testament to years of abandonment. As I approached the back of the barn, a sudden noise made me freeze, a soft, low groan. I swung the flashlight in the direction of the sound, heart racing. My pulse thudded in my ears as I took a cautious step forward, the pitchfork feeling inadequate in my hands. Then I saw it, a shadowy form huddled in the corner, half hidden behind a stack of old feed bags. My breath caught in my throat. The figure twisted and turned, barely human, with long, tangled hair that hung like tendrils of smoke. It seemed to be murmuring something, a soft, mournful chant that sent chills cascading down my spine. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. I'm lost," it replied, the voice hoarse and cracked like dried leaves. "They don't let me leave." The figure lifted its head, revealing a gaunt face that looked both familiar and foreign. The hollow eyes held a depth of sorrow that was almost tangible. For a moment, I thought of my brother Nathan, who had gone missing months ago under mysterious circumstances. The resemblance sent a jolt of panic through me. "Nathan?" I whispered, stepping closer, the pitchfork trembling in my grip. "No, not Nathan," it whispered back. "He's gone. They took him." Fear washed over me, thick and suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from that face, the anguish etched into every line. "What did they take you for? Who did this?" "They feed," it said, voice trembling. "They feed on the lost. You mustn't stay." Suddenly, a noise erupted from the shadows of the barn, a cacophony of growls and chattering whispers that echoed like a dark symphony. I turned towards the source, the beam of my flashlight shaking. From the darker depths, figures began to emerge, twisted shapes that slithered and crawled, their eyes glinting like shards of glass in the moonlight. They moved with a disjointed, unnatural grace, their bodies grotesquely contorted as they surrounded the huddled form in the corner. Panic surged within me, and I felt a primal urge to flee. But my feet felt glued to the ground, paralyzed by the horror unfolding before my eyes. They were here for the lost, their mouths stretched wide in an unnatural grin, revealing teeth sharpened to points. "Run!" the figure screamed. "You need to leave." The words cracked through my paralysis. I turned and sprinted back towards the barn doors, heart pounding like a war drum, the shadows closing in behind me. I burst through the entrance into the cool night air, the moonlight offering fleeting comfort. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I raced towards the house, the flashlight swinging wildly, illuminating the chaos behind me. With a frantic push, I threw myself against the front door and locked it, leaning against it as my breath came in gasps. I felt foolish, but I could still hear the low growls seeping through the cracks, the sound crawling beneath my skin. I didn't know what I had just witnessed, but I sensed that the farm was steeped in darkness far beyond anything I had imagined. I needed to escape, but the land held a grip on me, drawing me back into its haunted embrace. As I slid down the door to the floor, shadows flickered against the walls of the room. A feeling of dread loomed over me, whispering that this wasn't over. Whatever had taken Nathan and others was still hungry, and I was next on the list. With my heart racing, I began to formulate a plan. I had to find a way out, to unlock the secrets buried in the darkness. But as I sat there, trembling, I realized that escaping the farm might be the least of my worries. The true horror lay in the inevitability of what awaited me out there, in the very fields I had once called home. Story 4, The Dark Reaping. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the fields that surrounded the old Davis farm. I had grown up in the shadow of those rusted silos and creaking barn doors, but returning to my childhood home after my father's passing felt like stepping into a ghost story I couldn't quite remember. The air was thick with the smell of dry earth and decay. A sense of foreboding settled over me as I unloaded the last of my belongings from the car, my heart heavy and my mind preoccupied. The property had once boasted a lush cornfield, a testament to my father's hard work and dedication. But time had not been kind. The crops had succumbed to blight, leaving the expansive land a patchwork of lifeless stalks and weeds. I had come back to settle his affairs, but I couldn't help but feel I was also coming back to confront the remnants of my childhood, both the good and the bad. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of memories. I pushed the door open, the familiar creak echoing through the empty rooms, stirring dust motes that danced in the dim light. The walls still bore the marks of my youth, crayon drawings, height measurements, and the faint echo of laughter that once filled the air. But they were just echoes now, shadows of a time that felt impossibly far away. As I sorted through my father's belongings, I stumbled upon an old journal tucked beneath a stack of faded newspapers. The cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. I flipped through it, intrigued. My father had always been a man of few words when it came to his emotions, but the journal revealed a side of him I had never known. His entries detailed the daily struggles of managing the farm, but there was something darker seeping through the lines, a growing unease that made my skin crawl. He wrote about the animals, how they had started acting strangely, pacing and bleating in the night, as if sensing something unseen. At first, I dismissed it as stress, a farmer's paranoia, but the further I read, the more his words gnawed at me. He mentioned a shadow that lurked near the barn, a feeling of being watched that enveloped him when he was alone. It struck a nerve within me. I could still remember the tales whispered by neighbors about the old farm, stories of curses and hauntings, tales spun from fear and ignorance, or so I thought back then. Curiosity drew me to the barn as twilight descended, painting the sky in shades of purple and gray. I hesitated at the entrance, the air growing cooler around me, brushing against my skin like a warning. With each step inside, the creaking would seem to murmur secrets. The stench of old hay mingled with something else, a metallic scent that turned my stomach. I knew I shouldn't be there, but I felt an inexplicable pull. The barn was dim, illuminated only by the slivers of moonlight filtering through the gaps in the slats. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing remnants of my father's life, rusty tools, scattered hay bales, and an empty trough. I approached the far corner, where shadows clung tightly. That was when I saw it, a pile of bones, small and bleached, scattered haphazardly like a grotesque puzzle left unsolved. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing. Goat bones, I thought, maybe chickens. But the sheer amount of them sent a chill down my spine. My father had never mentioned anything about dead animals. He had always been meticulous about care, even in his last days. I swallowed hard, the reality of my father's fear crashing against the walls of my disbelief. Had it been true? Was something here that had haunted him, something I had ignored? Suddenly, I heard it, a soft rustling, like dry leaves skittering across the floor. I felt the hair on my neck prickle. The barn was no longer just a relic from my past, it was alive, breathing in the silence, waiting. I turned my flashlight toward the sound, but all I found was the shadows shifting as if they had a life of their own. I cursed under my breath, reminding myself it was just the wind, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I saw it, a figure, obscured by the darkness, standing near the far wall. The flashlight beam flickered as if it too was unsure whether to reveal what lurked there. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response came, only the heavy silence that deepened like the night around me. I took a cautious step forward, my heart racing with a mix of fear and the insatiable desire to uncover the truth. Yet as I neared the figure, it dissolved into the shadows, leaving only the echo of my call behind. I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down, a sense of dread that tangled itself around my thoughts. I was not alone anymore. With that realization, the barn walls seemed to constrict, the air growing thicker, suffocating. I turned to leave, but the entrance felt miles away, and I suddenly understood the fear that had gripped my father. This place, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of the past, haunted by what had once thrived here and what had been lost. As I stumbled back into the open air, a cold wind surged around me, whispering in a voice I could not understand. I was home, but home had become something terrible, something that would not let me go so easily. I could almost hear my father's journals calling to me, urging me to uncover the truth of the farm, even as everything within me screamed to run. The sun had set by the time I stepped out onto the porch. The fading light cast long shadows across the yard, twisting the familiar into something unnerving. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, an olfactory reminder that autumn had arrived. I leaned against the splintering wood of the railing, my thoughts spiraling back to the old barn. Its silhouette loomed against the darkening sky, a gaping mouth ready to swallow secrets whole. Earlier that day, I had been on my hands and knees, digging around the roots of the ancient apple tree. My grandfather had told me stories about that tree, how it had been planted when the farm was new. But that morning, I found something buried just beneath the surface, an old tin box, rusted and misshapen. My heart had raced with the thrill of discovery, but when I pried it open, the contents felt wrong. Inside, a collection of dusty photographs and brittle letters whispered of a family I had never known, a family that had farmed this land long before my grandfather. Their faces stared back at me, ghostly and somber, eyes seemingly aware, as if they had witnessed horrors I couldn't begin to comprehend. I had tucked the box beneath my bed, careful not to let my curiosity turn to obsession, but every creak of the old house haunted me with questions that begged for answers. What happened to them? Who were they? I couldn't shake the feeling that their stories were intertwined with mine, as if this farm was not just a place but a vessel of collective memory. As darkness enveloped the landscape, I decided to face the barn. It had always been a source of unease for me, even as a child, a place where silences lingered too long and shadows moved in ways that defied natural law. With a flashlight in hand, I stepped off the porch, the wooden boards groaning behind me like an old man reluctant to let go of the warmth of the sun. The path to the barn was overgrown, wild grass brushing against my legs, the remnants of summer clinging to life as autumn began to claim its territory. Every step I took felt heavier, the air thickening around me, pressing down as if trying to communicate a warning. I reached the barn's entrance, the doors hanging slightly ajar, creaking softly in the stillness. Pushing the doors open, I was met with the familiar scent of hay and something more unsettling, something metallic that made me lightheaded. Once inside, I swept the beam of my flashlight across the interior. The dust motes danced in the light, swirling like spirits lost within the confines of the barn. The old wooden beams loomed overhead, dark and foreboding. I stepped further in, my boots crunching on the loose hay scattered across the floor. The animals that once filled the space with life were long gone, leaving only the whispers of their shadows behind. A chill crept up my spine, and I stopped, straining to listen. The barn had a pulse, a rhythm of its own that seemed to resonate with the wind outside. And then I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping sound. My heart raced as I moved toward the source, passing the remnants of discarded tools and broken machinery. I felt as though I was walking through the bones of the farm, a mausoleum of what once was. The thumping grew louder, echoing off the walls, drawing me deeper into the shadows. At the far corner of the barn, I found the source of the noise. A trapdoor, partially ajar, revealed a darkened hole below. The thumping pulsed from the depths, a heartbeat, perhaps, or something more sinister. Swallowing hard, I crouched down to peer into the darkness, and a wave of nausea hit me as the musty scent of decay wafted up, clawing at my throat. I reached for the edge of the door, my hand trembling. It felt wrong to pry it open, yet an unshakable curiosity anchored me. I dug my nails into the wooden surface, forcing it wider until it creaked in protest. With a final push, the door swung open, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into the void below. I hesitated, fear battling with an irrepressible urge to uncover the truth. The thumping faded momentarily, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to mock my hesitation. Summoning what courage I had, I switched off the flashlight and descended into the darkness, relying on instinct rather than sight. The air grew cooler, thick with the palpable weight of forgotten history. I felt the walls press in on me, closing around my shoulders, squeezing out the breath from my lungs. Each step echoed louder in the silence, a countdown to whatever lay below. At the bottom, I found myself in a dimly lit room, the only source of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The floor was scattered with scraps of cloth, old tools, and remnants of what appeared to be animal bones, small, brittle, and bleached by time. I felt a wave of nausea surge as I stepped further in, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back. The thumping started again, louder now, reverberating through the floorboards. Something was down here, something alive, its presence an undeniable force that wrapped around me. I turned my flashlight on, the beam slicing through the darkness like a blade. It fell upon the far wall, and my stomach twisted at the sight. Drawings, crude and frantic, scrawled in what looked like blood. The images depicted twisted figures, their features warped in expressions of anguish, surrounded by dark trees stretching out like claws. And then I saw it, a shadow shifting among the bones, something human yet not, a figure that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as that haunting heartbeat I had followed. In that moment, the air grew electric, filling my lungs with static dread. I stumbled back, the light quivering in my crib, illuminating the horror that lay before me. That barn wasn't a sanctuary, it was a tomb. A place where something ancient and terrible had been buried long ago, and now it had awakened. My thoughts spiraled, but one truth crystallized even amidst the chaos. It was time to leave, to escape the grip of this land that had begun to feel alive, hungry for its secrets to be unearthed. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, stretching them into grotesque contours that felt alive with menace. I stood at the edge of the cornfield, the rustling leaves whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. It had been days since my brother, Ethan, vanished into the labyrinth of green stalks, and the heavy air carried a weight of dread that settled deep in my chest. Each evening, I returned to this spot, hoping to glean something more from the insatiable darkness that enveloped the farm. I replayed the last day I'd seen him in my mind, the picture of his face crumpled in confusion as he prepared to venture into the field. "I'll be fine, Sam," he had said, that infuriatingly confident grin stretched across his face. But now, lingering doubts gnawed at my insides, and every rustle of the corn stalks felt like a taunt, a reminder of his absence. The sun had fully set, and an unnatural chill swept through the air. I shivered and turned back toward the farmhouse, the old structure looming behind me like a watching sentinel. My parents had grown increasingly distant, wrapped in their own grief. I felt like a ghost in my childhood home, slipping through the shadows, seeking solace in spaces where my brother's laughter once echoed. Even his favorite chair, worn and faded in the living room, seemed to sink into the darkness, mourning his loss as much as I did. That night, I decided to dig deeper into what was left behind. There were whispers among the townsfolk, worrying murmurings about the recent disappearances in the area. But the stories were always vague, spoken in hushed tones, as if saying the words out loud could summon whatever evil was lurking in the shadows. I retrieved my flashlight and ignored the shivers racing down my spine as I made my way to the barn. The moonlight spilled through the cracks in the old wooden beams, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The barn had once been a lively place, filled with the sounds of hooves and laughter, but now it stood silent, a relic of better times. I stepped inside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air was stale, thick with the smell of hay and something else, something that made bile rise in my throat. I shone my flashlight around, revealing old tools rusting in the corners, a few broken farm implements lying abandoned. Then, just beyond a stack of crates, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A worn leather jacket, unmistakably Ethan's, was draped over a hay bale. My fingers trembled as I reached out to touch it, the fabric still warm, as if he had just been there. Panic surged through me. Had he come back here after all? I scanned the barn, searching for any sign of him, any sound that might offer hope. And then I heard it, a soft scuffling noise coming from the back. Adrenaline surged, pushing me beyond my fear. I crept toward the sound, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. As I stepped deeper into the shadows, I felt the temperature plummet, the air growing heavy and oppressive. The scuffling grew louder, more frantic, and I felt a primal urge to flee, but I forced my legs to move. I rounded a corner and found myself staring into a dimly lit nook, where a small wooden door stood ajar. It had always been locked, a forgotten part of the barn that no one dare enter. We never had a reason to. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small, dark room filled with old crates and cobwebs. My flashlight beam caught something glinting in the corner, and I stepped closer, my pulse racing. It was a rusted metal box, half buried beneath the debris. I dropped to my knees, curiosity overwhelming my fear, and pried it open. Inside were pieces of old photographs, worn, faded images of people I didn't recognize, their faces etched with despair. I shuddered, realizing they were the faces of previous owners of the farm, each one marked by anguish. Suddenly, I heard a noise from behind me, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. My heart lurched as I turned, shivering in terror. The flashlight flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before it steadied again. I saw something lurking in the shadows, a hulking shape that loomed larger than life, its eyes glinting like embers in the dark. In that moment, instincts kicked in. I scrambled backward, my throat constricting in fear, but the thing charged forward, the faint light revealing a twisted body hunched and grotesque. It moved with a speed that belied its size, and I realized it wasn't human, not anymore. It was an abomination, a creature born of nightmares, Ethan's laughter echoing in my mind, now twisted and mocking. With an instinctive cry, I scrambled to my feet, racing back through the barn, adrenaline propelling me forward. The thing was gaining on me, its growl escalating into a roar that reverberated through my bones. I burst through the barn doors and into the open air, the moonlight blinding for a moment as I stumbled forward. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the cornfield, gasping for breath. But my heart sank as I glanced over my shoulder. The creature, whatever it was, stood at the entrance of the barn, its silhouette imposing against the shadows. I could hear the soft rustle of corn behind me, a reminder that the darkness was not just confined to the barn. Fear coursed through my veins, mingling with despair. Ethan was gone, and now I was left to confront whatever horror this farm had unleashed. As I turned back toward the field, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. This was just the beginning, and I knew now that the farm held more than just memories. It harbored something we were never meant to uncover. I awoke to the unsettling sounds of the farm. The creaking of old wood, the rustling of the wind through the dying corn stalks outside, and the distant caw of crows echoed in my mind. Every sound felt amplified in the quiet of dawn, heightening the anxiety that had nestled deep within my chest since our arrival. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and let my feet touch the cold, hard floor. The chill seeped into my bones, and I shivered, pulling my thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. Jenna was still asleep, her face peaceful in the dim light. I couldn't help but watch her for a moment, wishing I could share her dreams, however idyllic they might be. I thought of the stories I had read about haunted farms, the relentless spirits of those who had suffered. A shudder ran through me at the thought of the girl in the field, the girl whose whispers still reverberated in my mind days later. What had she wanted? I tiptoed past her, careful not to wake her, and stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor creaked underfoot, sending a pulse of anxiety shooting through me. The house felt alive, like it was watching. Every corner seemed to harbor whispers, secrets buried deep within the walls. I forced myself to breathe steadily and made my way to the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee would help me shake off the unease. The kitchen was dark, only shadows daring to linger in the corners. I flicked on the light, and it buzzed to life reluctantly, illuminating the room with a sickly glow. The air was thick with dust, a layer of neglect coating every surface. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, stealing glances out the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an orange hue across the horizon, yet the fields remained shrouded in a heavy fog. As the kettle began to whistle, I thought I heard something outside, a faint rustling, almost like a whisper on the wind. My heart raced, and I stepped closer to the window. Beyond the fog, the cornstalks swayed as if trying to break free from the earth. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was seeing things, but there it was again, a shadow moving between the rows. I grabbed a mug and poured myself a steaming cup of coffee, my hand trembling slightly. I needed to see what was happening out there. I opened the back door, the hinges creaking ominously, and stepped outside. The chill of the morning air struck me, wrapping around my body like a shroud. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked toward the fields. The ground felt soaked beneath my boots, the mud sucking at my heels with every step. I squinted into the fog, willing my eyes to adjust to the gloom. I heard it once more, soft whispers, carried by the breeze. They seemed to beckon me deeper into the field. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding rising in my gut, but curiosity urged me forward. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead, the fog swirling like a living thing, and the whispers grew louder. They sounded like a child's voice, a sweet, playful tone laced with desperation. My heart raced as I called out, hoping to find the source. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The whispers stopped abruptly, and I felt a chill that went beyond the morning air. The silence pressed heavily around me, as if the world had paused, waiting. I took another step deeper into the field, my heart pounding in my chest. The corn stalks loomed around me like soldiers standing in formation, their dry leaves rustling as if they were sharing secrets. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shape darting between the stalks. My blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. I pushed through the corn stalks, my heart racing, desperate to find whatever was hiding. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a haunting melody. "Help me," they sang, echoing in my ears. I stumbled through the dense maze of corn stalks, fear gnawing at my insides, the urge to turn back battling with an overwhelming need to discover the truth. As I rounded a cluster of stalks, I found myself in a small clearing. At the center stood a dilapidated scarecrow, its straw stuffing spilling out like entrails, its old clothes tattered and worn. But that wasn't what drew my gaze. It was the small figure beside it, half hidden in the fog. A child, no more than 6 or 7, with tangled hair and a nightgown that looked as if it had been stitched together from shadows. "Help me," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. My breath caught in my throat as I scrutinized her face. It was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes glimmered with a fear that mirrored my own. "They come at night." "Who comes?" I managed to croak out, inching closer, drawn in by her fragile presence. "The ones in the fields." She shivered as if remembering something terrible, her small hands clutching the tattered hem of her gown. "They want me back." "Back?" I asked, my heart racing. I was flooded with questions, but every instinct screamed at me to run. What was happening? Before I could say anything more, a loud crack rang through the air, and the girl's eyes widened in terror. "You have to go," she cried, her voice breaking. "They're here." The fog thickened, swirling around me with an unnatural fervor, and the whispers crescendoed into a chaotic clamor. I stumbled back, my fear now an all-consuming force. I turned and ran, the field closing in around me as the voices screamed my name, demanding I stay. Somehow, I burst through the edge of the cornfield, gasping for breath, and found myself back in the backyard. The sun was now fully risen, but I felt its warmth as a distant memory. I glanced back at the field, now eerily silent, the shadows of the corn standing tall and still, hiding their dark secrets. As I caught my breath, I felt a sense of dread roll over me, a certainty that this was only the beginning. The early morning sun filtered through the fog that clung stubbornly to the fields, casting a gloomy pallor over the barn. My heart raced as I stepped cautiously outside, each pulse echoing the uncertainty gnawing at my insides. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind like a broken record, the whispers in the dark, the scuttling shadows, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I had hoped that with the dawn would come clarity, but instead, it only deepened the dread embedded in my bones. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders, and trudged toward the barn. I had to confront the unsettling sense that something was wrong with the animals, something beyond their usual discontent. The thought of going back inside that dark, cavernous space unsettled me, yet I knew I had to check on them. As I pushed open the creaking door, it groaned in response, a sound akin to a warning. The dim light barely illuminated the scattered hay and the heavy silence that enveloped the place. I stepped inside, heart pounding, the scent of must and manure heavy in my nostrils. The animals were huddled together, eyes wide and unblinking. Their unease prickled at my skin like static electricity. "Hey, guys," I called out, forcing cheer into my voice, but my words fell hollow. The goats bleated nervously, and the cows shifted uneasily, their breath misting in the cold air. There was something about their behavior that sent a jolt of fear through me. I scanned the cramped space, searching for signs of what might have unsettled them. Then I noticed a deep, dark stain seeping into the straw beneath the farthest stall. I approached cautiously, my heart racing, and as I neared, the metallic smell assaulted me. I knelt beside the stain, my instinct screaming at me to turn away, but curiosity rooted me in place. It was red and thick, glistening sickly in the dim light. I recoiled, my stomach churning. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I grasped a nearby pitchfork, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. Behind me, the door swung open with a sudden gust, slamming against the wall. I whipped around, clutching the pitchfork, but there was nothing. Only emptiness stared back at me. "Just the wind," I muttered, trying to reassure myself. I turned back to the stain, and my breath caught in my throat. The animals were now quiet, their eyes locked on something beyond me. I followed their gaze, heart pounding, but still saw nothing. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the barn. My body tensed, every nerve on high alert. The sound was primal, raw. I could feel the vibration in my bones, a warning that something had shifted in the atmosphere. I stepped backward, trying to calm my racing heart, but the pitchfork felt like a flimsy shield against whatever was lurking in the dark corners. As if in response to my fear, the growl intensified. I followed the sound, my heart thundering in my chest. The shadows seemed to deepen, and I half expected to see something emerge from them, something dark and twisted. But nothing came. The silence returned, thick and suffocating, and I grew aware of the creeping sensation that I was now alone. The goats suddenly erupted into frantic bleats, their panic contagious. I turned back, raising the pitchfork in defense, but the stall was empty. My skin crawled as I caught sight of the trough, now muddy, as if something had disturbed it. I edged closer, my breath hitching. The trough was overturned, splattered with dark remnants that had no place in a barn. I swallowed hard, nausea washing over me. Just then, I heard it, a soft shuffling coming from above. My gaze snapped upward to the loft. The barn was older, the wood weathered and splitting, but I'd never thought twice about it until now. The sound echoed again, heavier this time, like something pacing, lurking just out of sight. I felt the urge to flee, but I couldn't move. I gritted my teeth and climbed the rickety ladder, each step creaking ominously beneath me. When I finally reached the loft, the air felt electric, charged with a palpable menace. I peered into the shadowed corners, but all I saw was the scattered hay and old tools. Yet the shuffling had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye, a dark shape shifting in the far corner. My breath quickened as I squinted into the gloom, straining to see what was there. A moment passed before the shape revealed itself. It was one of the goats, but it was not right. Its eyes were wide, staring blankly, and its body was twisted unnaturally, as though something inside had broken free. Panic surged through me. As I stepped back, the goat suddenly bolted toward me, but it wasn't just a goat anymore. It was something otherworldly, an embodiment of fear. I stumbled backward, losing my footing and crashing into the wall. The creature lunged, and I flailed, raising the pitchfork to defend myself, the air thick with a suffocating stench. The loft had become a trap, darkness closing in around me as I attempted to regain my balance. In one swift movement, the goat, or whatever it had become, leaped at me, and I could only scream as I braced for impact, the world spiraling into chaos and shadow. As the echo of my voice faded, I realized then that I was not just losing the battle for survival. I was being pulled into something far more sinister, something rooted deep in the very earth that once nourished life. Story 5, Twilight Harvest. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cornfields that bordered the old Whitmore farm. I had spent every summer of my childhood in this place, a sanctuary of dirt roads and distant memories, but as the years passed, those memories started to fray. The whispers of the wind through the tall crops sounded like voices, echoing secrets long buried within the earth. It was late August, and the air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin like a weary shroud. My parents had decided to visit my grandmother in the city, but I had opted to stay behind. I felt drawn to the farm, as if the land itself were beckoning me. There was a part of me that longed to uncover the truth behind the stories that had haunted my youth, stories I had dismissed as mere childhood fears. That evening, I wandered into the barn, the old wooden doors creaking in protest as I pushed them open. The smell of hay and aged wood filled my senses. Even in the dim light, I could see the patterns of dust swirling in the air, illuminated by the last remnants of daylight. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb the disarray that had settled over the years. There were remnants of my childhood scattered throughout. A rusted bicycle leaned against the wall, its tires deflated and tiresome, and a few worn-out toys lay abandoned on the ground. I picked up a faded red truck, memories flooding back of summer days spent racing it through the dirt paths, but the nostalgia faded as a chill swept through the barn, as though the shadows were closing in. I turned my attention to the far corner, where the dim outline of a trapdoor caught my eye. It had always been there, hidden beneath a tattered rug, but in recent years, I had ignored it. I felt an inexplicable urge to lift it. The stories of the old Whitmore farm echoed in my memory, the rumors of what lay beneath, of things that should never see the light of day. With my heart pounding, I knelt down, shifting the rug aside. The wood was cold beneath my fingers as I grasped the iron handle. The snap of the latch echoed in the silence, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very bones of the barn. I hesitated, the air thick with anticipation and fear. I could almost hear the voices from the past urging me to stop, to leave it undisturbed. But curiosity won out. I pulled the door open, and a wave of musty air rushed up, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. A rickety wooden staircase spiraled down into darkness. I lit my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the blackness. Each step creaked beneath my weight, a warning that I was disturbing something that had been forgotten. As I descended, the air grew colder, more oppressive. I reached the bottom and stepped into a small underground chamber. The walls were lined with rough stones, damp and slick with moisture that dripped steadily from above. I scanned the room, my light illuminating the remnants of an old root cellar. Jars filled with murky liquid lined the shelves, and I squinted, trying to discern what lay inside. But it wasn't the jars that made my blood run cold. It was the old wooden table in the center of the room. It was covered in a layer of dust, but the faint outlines of something dark marred the surface. I approached cautiously, the weight of dread heavy on my shoulders. As I drew closer, I saw faded stains that seemed to tell stories of their own. My heart raced as I realized they were not just stains but remnants of something far more sinister. I stumbled back, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my grasp. The stories I had heard as a child clawed their way to the forefront of my mind, tales of rituals and sacrifices, of farmers who had lost their minds to the land itself. The room felt alive, the walls whispering secrets as chills crawled down my spine. I could almost hear them, the voices that had haunted the cornfields, urging me to leave, to run. But fear was a suffocating blanket, and I felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The old barn seemed to shudder with the sound, the vibration sneaking through the earth beneath me. Fear surged, and I sprinted back up the stairs, the trapdoor slamming shut behind me. I burst into the barn and froze. Everything felt off, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The air was thick with a palpable tension, as if the very farm itself was watching, waiting for my next move. My heart hammered in my chest, and I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere that clung to me. As I stepped into the twilight, the hushed rustle of the cornfield surrounded me, and for the first time, I sensed that I was now alone. The whispers of the land grew louder, haunting echoes that promised to reveal their secrets if only I dared to listen. But the stories they told were not meant for my ears, not yet. I turned to flee, but the land gripped my heels, as if trying to pull me back into the depths of the darkness I had just escaped. The sun vanished completely, leaving only a sliver of twilight, and with it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle heavily on my chest. I was in the grip of something ancient and unforgiving, and I knew, even then, I had awoken something that might never let me go. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie twilight over the farm that stretched endlessly around me. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision as I closed the door to the barn behind me. I could still feel the coolness of the iron latch against my palm, a reminder of the solitude that enveloped the landscape. The faint sound of rustling leaves mingled with the creaking wood of the old barn, as if the building itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. The events of the previous night lingered like a bad dream. The piercing howl of the wind, the chilling thud that echoed from the dark corners of the barn, and the unnerving feeling that I was being watched, these sensations gnawed at my mind. I brushed my fingers against the rough surface of the barn wall, hoping for comfort, but only feeling the unsettling chill return. I had come to the farm to help my uncle with the harvest, but the oppressive weight of the land felt more like a curse than a blessing. As I ambled towards the fields, the air grew thick with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the beauty was tainted by an underlying sense of dread that seemed to seep from the very ground. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the face of something sinister peering out from the shadows. The first day had been uneventful, but the second was different. I discovered that the chickens had gone missing. I stood by the dilapidated coop, its wooden slats warped and splintered, staring into the darkness where they should have been. Their absence felt like a violation, an omen. I could hear the wind whispering through the trees, almost mocking me, as if to say that I was trespassing in a realm that hadn't welcomed me. "Uncle Harold," I called, my voice trembling as I walked towards the farmhouse. The dimly lit kitchen cast an inviting glow, contradicting the chill that clenched my heart. I found him hunched over the table, a bottle of whiskey cradled in his hands. It seemed he had been there for hours, the remnants of a half-eaten meal left untouched. He looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "What is it?" he mumbled, slurring the words slightly. "The chickens are gone," I said hesitantly, the unease suffocating me. I wasn't sure how to articulate the sense of dread that had settled over me since arriving. His expression hardened, a flicker of something dark flashing in his eyes. "They're just chickens. Probably a fox or something." He dismissed my concern with a wave of his hand, but I could see the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers trembled around the bottle. "Something?" I echoed, skepticism creeping into my voice. "What do you mean by something?" He let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You wouldn't want to know, kid." It was a warning, but one that only served to heighten my anxiety. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken fears, and I could feel something stirring just beyond the threshold of the house. I stepped back, retreating into the living room, the flickering shadows seeming to come alive with each passing second. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a story I didn't belong to, a horror story where the protagonist always met a grim fate. Later that night, sleep evaded me. Every creak of the old house sent my heart racing, the shadows morphing into dark figures that loomed over me. I tossed and turned, unwilling to surrender to the fear that had gripped me since I stepped foot on the farm. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting silver beams across the floor, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening intently. Then I heard it, the soft scratching sound outside my window. My breath hitched in my throat, my instinct screaming for me to look away, but curiosity held me captive. The sound persisted, persistent and unnerving, and I finally summoned the courage to rise from my bed. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. Peering through the glass, I saw nothing but empty fields shrouded in darkness. The wind rustled the tall grass, creating a symphony of whispers that seemed to call my name. Just as I was about to step back, movement caught my eye. There, near the edge of the woods, stood a figure, a silhouette against the moonlight. My heart raced in my chest. At first, I thought it must be my imagination, but then the figure moved closer, its outline growing clearer. It was a child, no older than 7 or 8, standing alone in the field. I squinted, trying to make sense of the sight. The child's face was pale, almost luminescent under the moon's glow, with wide eyes that seemed to search for something in the darkness. "Hey!" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. But the child didn't move or respond. Instead, it raised a small hand, pointing directly at me. Fear gripped me as I stumbled back from the window, vaulting back into the shadows of my room. My heart pounded in my ears as the weight of the room closed in around me. What was a child doing out there at this hour? And why was it looking at me like that? I forced myself to breathe, listening intently for any sound from the figure outside, but all I heard was the wind rustling the leaves. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The next morning, I intended to confront my uncle about the child, to ask if he knew who it was or why they were out there alone. But when I stumbled into the kitchen, the scent of burnt coffee filled the air, mixing with the familiar earthy aroma of the farm. Uncle Harold sat muttering under his breath, a dark cloud hanging over him. "The chickens," he said abruptly, his voice low and strained. "They're gone for good. And there's something else." I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat across from him, sensing that whatever was coming next would unravel the very fabric of reality around us. The sun dipped lower behind the horizon as I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel that seemed eager to swallow the sound. I had spent the morning in town, trying to shake off the remnants of that strange night. The whispers clung to me like cobwebs, refusing to be shaken away entirely. Every shadow in the store felt like a specter, and every creak in the floorboards of my modest home felt amplified in the silence. I stepped out of my pickup, the chill of the evening wrapping around me like a damp blanket. The scent of earth after the rain hung heavy in the air, mingling with the smell of the freshly turned soil from the fields. It should have been comforting, a reminder of the life I had built here, but instead, it filled me with foreboding. The events of last night replayed in my mind like a broken record. The footsteps, the screams, the suffocating feeling of being watched, it was all too vivid, too real. I trudged toward the barn, drawn as if by an unseen force. The old structure loomed ahead, its weatherwood creaking softly in the wind. I hesitated at the entrance, the memory of that horrible thing lurking in the shadows flooding back. But curiosity gnawed at me. What had I really seen? Was it the product of a fraying mind? With a deep breath, I stepped inside. Once inside, I scanned the dark corners, half expecting the figure to leap out at me. The barn was empty, the faint smell of hay lingering in the stale air. I flicked on the light, the bulb buzzing to life and casting a yellowish glow. The shadows danced ominously, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw movement. I shook my head as I moved deeper into the building, focusing on the rows of tools hanging on the wall. They looked innocent enough, but I felt a shiver down my spine. I reached for the shovel, its handle cool and familiar beneath my palm. It brought back memories of long days spent digging, the satisfaction that came with turning the earth. I thought about how I would often come here to escape, to find solace in the routine of farm life. But now, the barn felt different, as if it held secrets I was not meant to uncover. As I turned to leave, a sudden noise made me freeze. It was a soft rustle, almost like the sound of fabric brushing against something. I glanced around, my heart racing as I scanned the dark corners again. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely breaking the silence. No answer, just the sound of my own breathing echoing back at me. I stepped back cautiously, ready to bolt if necessary, but then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a low grunt or growl, emanating from a section of the barn I rarely used. The small confines where I stored feed bags and old machinery felt suffocating. I edged closer, the noise pulling me in like a moth to flame. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the shovel. Reaching the end of the barn, I spotted a shadowy figure crouched near a pile of burlap sacks. My breath hitched. It was hunched over, barely visible in the dim light. I gripped the shovel tighter, feeling the weight of it in my hands. As I stepped forward, the figure turned, revealing a face that was both familiar and utterly foreign. It was my neighbor, Old Man Harris, his beard tangled and matted with dirt. His eyes were wild and sunken, reflecting a kind of madness I had never seen before. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed to flicker in and out of coherence. "They'll find you. You must leave the farm." "What are you talking about?" I asked, the tremor in my voice betraying my fear. "What's going on?" "They're coming for you," he hissed, and my heart plummeted. "It's the land. It's angry." He pointed toward the ground, his fingers trembling as if the mere thought of it terrified him. "You need to go. Now." I took a step back, the shovel raised defensively. "What do you mean, angry? What have you done?" He looked at me, not with the eyes of a man, but with the gaze of something tormented. "I didn't mean to dig too deep. The roots were not meant to be disturbed." Confusion washed over me. "What roots? What are you talking about?" But before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside, rattling the barn. I and Harris both instinctively turned towards the sound. I felt dread settle in my stomach as I thought of the vulnerabilities of my land. Had it been livestock? Or something worse? Harris grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the shadows. "We have to hide. It's here." Panic surged through me as I jerked away from his grip. "What is here?" Just then, the door of the barn burst open, and a chill swept in, carrying with it the stench of decay. I saw a dark shape moving amidst the tall grass just outside the barn, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. My heart raced, and instinct kicked in. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was headed, just desperate to escape the malevolence that clung to me like a curse. As I sprinted through the barn's exit, I could hear Harris screaming behind me, lost to the fear that consumed him. I stumbled into the night, the chill air biting at my skin, but I couldn't stop. I ran past the fields that had once felt like home, away from the farmhouse where I had built my dreams. I felt the darkness clawing at my heels, urging me deeper into the night. Whatever haunted this land, I knew now it was far from finished. The sun sank lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the fields that stretched like dark fingers toward the old barn. It was the time of day when the world felt suspended between light and darkness, the air thick with tension. I hadn't stepped foot in the barn since that dreadful night when I had first heard the whispers, and now my heart raced at the thought of facing whatever lingered within its decaying walls. As I stood at the edge of the yard, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it an unsettling blend of stale hay and something metallic, something rotten. I had hoped the farm's familiar scents would bring me comfort, but now they churned my stomach. I felt the weight of my father's absence deepening the stillness that engulfed the place. He had always been my anchor, guiding me through the mundane and the strange. The barn loomed ahead, its paint peeling like dead skin. I noticed a door ajar, creaking gently in the breeze. Memories flooded back to me, time spent learning to ride, the smell of warm leather, the laughter shared with my siblings. But those memories twisted into something sinister as I recalled the last time I was here. I had heard voices, low and conspiratorial, drifting from the shadows. I had convinced myself it was my imagination, some trick of isolation, but now the feeling of paranoia crept up my spine anew. With a deep breath, I made my way toward the barn. Each step felt like an act of betrayal against my own instincts, yet I needed to confront what haunted me. I pushed the door wider, and it creaked in protest, revealing the dim interior. The light from the setting sun filtered in through gaps in the walls, casting ghostly rays that fought against the encroaching darkness. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. I could hear the faint rustle of straw beneath my feet as I stepped cautiously forward. My heart hammered against my ribs, a steady reminder of my fragility in this forgotten place. The whispers from the other night echoed faintly, barely audible but unmistakably there, as if the barn itself had a voice. "Hello?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the silence around me. I felt foolish for calling out, expecting to be met with only the shadows, but part of me hoped for an answer, any answer that could guide me through my fear. Nothing stirred in response. I moved deeper into the barn, past old tools and empty stalls that had once been filled with the warmth of life. The grain bins stood like tombstones, resolutely guarding their secrets. I ran my fingers along their rough surfaces, hoping to find solace in their familiarity. Instead, I found remnants of long-gone creatures, the cracked shells of eggs, rat droppings, and the lingering scent of decay that hung heavier than ever. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a dark mist. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. They were more distinct now, a cacophony of muted voices layered upon each other, speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. I strained to listen, desperate to decipher their meaning, but the more I focused, the more elusive they became. "Leave," a voice finally broke through, hoarse and breathy. It sent chills racing down my spine. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a rusted plow blade. My heart raced as I turned to leave, but something compelled me to stay. Perhaps it was the need for answers, the desire to understand what darkness had settled over my family. I stepped toward the far corner of the barn, where the shadows pooled like ink. There, partially obscured by an old tarp, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A wooden crate, its sides splintered and covered in grime, lay half hidden. The air seemed to thicken around it, pregnant with foreboding. Without thinking, I knelt beside it, peeling back the tarp to reveal what lay beneath. The crate creaked open, and I recoiled at the sight. Inside, there were bones, small, fragile, and stained with dirt. I swallowed hard as the reality hit me like a slap. They were animal bones, but their arrangement was wrong, too deliberate. The bones were laid out in a pattern, a cruel mockery of life. Panic surged through me, clawing at the edges of my sanity. A gust of wind swept through the barn, sending shivers rippling through me. The whispers crescendoed, urging me to leave, to flee. I staggered back, heart thudding in my ears, the weight of dread pressing down on me. Something was wrong here, and it was far worse than I had imagined. "Leave," the voice rasped again, this time clearer, more insistent. The sound came from behind me, and I turned to face the darkening shadows. A figure stood there, barely discernible from the gloom, its shape shifting as if it were more shadow than flesh. Fear paralyzed me, my instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Who are you?" I choked out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face half hidden in darkness, eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered, and with those words, the world around me seemed to shift, the barn's walls closing in, suffocating me with an overwhelming sense of despair. In that moment, I understood the full weight of the farm's lingering secrets, the darkness that haunted my family. I had entered a realm where no one could help me, and as the figure moved closer, I realized I was no longer just a visitor. I had become part of the horror that thrived within the very soil of this cursed land. The morning sun rose reluctantly over the horizon, its weak light filtering through the cracked windows of the farmhouse where I had taken refuge. I awoke to the sounds of the farm settling around me, the creaking of the old floorboards and the rustling of the wind against the siding. My heart raced with memories of the night before. The darkness had pressed in close, suffocating me under its weight as I lay wide-eyed under the ragged blankets. I had glimpsed the outline of something moving in the late hours, something that didn't belong. As I pulled myself from the bed, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. There was an unease clinging to the house, a lingering presence that whispered caution in my ear. I had barely slept, and the shadows of my nightmares haunted me still. The image of the barn door swinging open, the figure silhouetted against the moonlight, wouldn't leave me. I needed to find out what was going on, but dread rooted me to the spot. With a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway, its wooden floor groaning under my weight. I had taken refuge here for 2 days now, hoping the strange occurrences outside would fade into the mundane. But as soon as I descended the stairs, the air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. I looked out the kitchen window, my heart sinking at the sight before me. The field stretched out like a canvas marked with dark, twisted shapes. The cornstalks swayed, but not in the way I remembered from summers of yore. They shivered as if something unseen prowled through the rows. I turned away, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Setting my jaw, I poured myself a cup of coffee, its bitter aroma grounding me momentarily. The old farmhouse was empty. My family had scattered when the farm had begun to whisper its secrets. They had heard the stories, the local tales of the twisted fate that befell those who lingered too long in these fields. I was not one to believe in ghosts or spirits, but something about this place gnawed at the edges of my skepticism. I needed to confront the truth, to gather whatever courage remained, so I grabbed my jacket and headed outside. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot felt comforting, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I approached the barn, the air thickening with each step. The heavy wooden doors loomed before me, splintered and aged, like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow me whole. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the latch. What if there was something in there? Yet what awaited me outside seemed worse. The presence I felt was suffocating. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously as if they too protested against my intrusion. The interior greeted me with darkness, the sunlight barely penetrating the gloom. I took a cautious step inside, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The scent of hay and something more pungent filled the air. I strained my ears for any sound, walls whispering, a creature stirring, but silence enveloped me like a shroud. I advanced deeper, my heart pounding in my chest, the shadows curling around me like fingers. As I turned the corner, my breath caught. The hayloft above was dark, but I could make out something hanging from the rafters, a tattered rope swaying gently, as if someone had just swung from it. Panic surged in my veins. I stumbled backward, bumping into an old cart that rattled ominously. I caught my reflection in a shattered mirror leaning against the wall. My face was pale, eyes wide, and bloodshot. I turned to leave, but as I did, a low, guttural sound echoed from beyond the shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs, urging me to flee, but my feet remained glued to the floor. The noise grew louder, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I peered into the darkness, straining for clarity. Something moved, a silhouette shifting in the far corner, fluid and unnatural. Fear gripped me, tightening its icy fingers around my throat. I turned to run, but it was too late. The figure stepped into the weak light filtering through the doorway. It wasn't human. It had long limbs and eyes that glimmered with a feral hunger. I froze, caught between fight and flight as it advanced, its features grotesque and maligned. My body screamed for me to escape, but I was trapped in the grip of a primal dread. Then, from behind me, the barn doors slammed shut as if by an unseen hand. I whirled around, panic flooding my senses as I desperately pushed against the heavy wood. It wouldn't budge. The creature drew closer, its breath ragged, and I could smell the decay on its skin. I turned back to face it, adrenaline surging. "Stay away!" I shouted, but my voice sounded small and feeble. The creature halted, its head tilting curiously. For a moment, I thought I saw recognition in its eyes, but then it lunged, and instinct kicked in. I ducked and rolled, scrambling toward the back exit. My heart raced as I heard it crash against the wall behind me, the sound echoing through the dark. Finally, I reached the rear door and flung it open, stumbling out into the blinding light of day. I didn't stop running until I reached the cornfield, the stalks brushing against me like grasping fingers. I knew I had to warn anyone who would listen, but the words felt caught in my throat. As I pushed deeper into the rows, I glanced back at the barn, the horror still vivid in my mind. Whatever had been unleashed in that place would soon know I was gone. But I would not be free of it. The farm held its secrets, and I had only begun to unravel the terror woven into its very soil. I had to leave, to escape this waking nightmare, but the land would not let me go. It was hungry, and I could feel it calling me back. Story 6: Fallow Shadows. I still remember the first time I set foot on the old Lancaster farm. Nestled at the end of a long and winding dirt road, it seemed to emerge from the earth itself, cloaked in shadows and silence. The farmhouse, with its peeling paint and sagging roof, loomed like a specter from another time. My father had mentioned the place as a potential buy before his sudden passing, and when my mother insisted we sell our city house to move there, I found myself with no choice but to follow her to this forsaken plot of land. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, mingled with a musty odor that seemed to cling to everything. As I stepped out of our old truck, the crunch of gravel underfoot felt like the awakening of something long asleep. The sun was setting, casting an orange hue that clashed with the grays of the house and the dilapidated barn beyond. I tried to shake the feeling of unease that curled in my stomach, but it settled there, heavy and cold. As we unpacked the boxes, my mother bustled about, her determination palpable, but I could see the fatigue etched into her features. She had thrown herself into this move, hoping perhaps that a fresh start would help her heal from Dad's death. I wished I could feel the same optimism, but the shadows of the house seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't ready to confront. "Come on, Ellie, help me with this," she called out, her voice echoing against the walls of the empty farmhouse. I shuffled inside, the door creaking ominously behind me. Dust motes danced in the faded light that streamed through grimy windows. Each step I took sent tiny clouds of dust swirling. It felt like I was disturbing the memories woven into the very floorboards. I made my way to the kitchen, where an ancient wood stove stood stubbornly against the wall, a relic from another era. The sink was dry, the cupboards bare, but my mother was already rummaging through a box filled with mismatched dishes. I offered to help, but she waved me away. "Just get settled, Ellie. We'll make this place home," she said with a weak smile, her words tinged with a forced cheerfulness I found hard to believe. That evening, we ate canned soup by candlelight, the flickering flames casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, crickets chirped a symphony of night, but there was another sound, a low, mournful moan that echoed through the darkness. I glanced at my mother, who had paused mid-sentence, her face pale as she looked toward the window. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart racing. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just the wind." But the winds around the farm had a way of carrying more than just the sound of rustling leaves. The feeling of ice watching has crept up my spine, and I felt the walls closing in, heavy with the weight of years gone by. That first night, I lay in the small bedroom I had claimed as my own, a worn-out mattress beneath me and darkness pressing against the edges of the room. Sleep eluded me, and instead, I listened, straining to hear anything beyond the usual creaks of an old house. A sudden thud jolted me upright, my heart pounding as I turned to the door. I wasn't the only one who heard it. "Mom?" I called softly, half expecting her to come rushing in, but there was silence, thick and suffocating. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the chill of the wooden floor biting at my feet. Cautiously, I stepped into the hallway, the wood groaning under my weight as if protesting my intrusion. My mother's bedroom door stood ajar, and I peered inside, calling her name again. The room was empty, the bed neatly made as if she had never slept there. Panic bubbled in my throat as I glanced down the staircase. The moaning had returned, now louder and more desperate. It clawed at my mind, urging me downward, beckoning me to discover its source. Each step felt like I was sinking further into a well of dread. As I reached the bottom, the sound intensified, now a terrible wail that resonated in my bones. I followed it through the dimly lit corridor, heart racing, until it led me to the rear door that opened to the barn. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the yawning darkness inside. The pungent smell of hay and something else, something rotting, hit me like a slap to the face. I squinted, trying to adjust to the blackness, and stepped inside. The air was colder, almost alive, wrapping around me like fingers intent on pulling me down. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned quickly, heart thudding in my chest, and found myself staring into the darkened space below the loft. A figure loomed there, half hidden in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I took a hesitant step back. "Mom?" I called again, but my voice sounded small and frightened, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The figure shifted, a whisper of movement, and the wail rose again, a sound so filled with grief, it almost sent me running back to the safety of the house. Before I could turn, the figure emerged into the faint light, revealing a silhouette that stole my breath away. It was a woman, her face obscured by tangled hair, and her eyes were hollow, sunken deep within their sockets. A chill swept through me as she raised her hand, a finger pointing directly at me, and in that moment, I understood. The farm was not just a home, it was a keeper of secrets dark and twisted, and I had stumbled right into its web. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a bloody hue across the fields as I stood at the edge of the corn maze. The stalks loomed like sentinels, their rustling whispers beckoning me closer. I had returned to the farm after last night's unsettling events, driven by an inexplicable urge to confront whatever dark presence lingered among the crops. My heart raced as I stepped forward, the ground beneath my boots crunching softly. Memories from yesterday's events flooded my mind. The sound of the wind, the strange thumping in the night, and that bizarre shadow darting between the rows. The air was thick, and a chill crawled along my spine, not from the evening breeze but from some deeper instinct, compelling me to leave while I still could. Yet, I pressed on, half determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers and the shadows. As I entered the maze, the towering stalks closed around me, and the late afternoon light dimmed, transforming the world into a labyrinth of shadows. My fingers brushed against the coarse leaves, and a sense of unease settled heavily in my stomach. It felt as though the corn were alive, watching me with an unblinking gaze. I had heard the stories, rumors that the land was cursed, haunted by those who had farmed it before. But I always brushed such tales aside, convinced they were mere fabrications, born from the isolation of rural life. Now, they echoed in my mind, amplifying every creak and rustle. I wandered deeper into the maze, my pulse quickening with each step. That thumping from last night returned to haunt me, thrumming in my ears like a distant heartbeat. It was rhythmic yet uneven, as if something or someone was moving just beyond my reach. I paused to listen, straining against the rustle of corn. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a surge of dread wash over me. "Hello?" My voice broke the silence, sounding weak even to my own ears. The stillness that followed only heightened my anxiety, and I took another step forward. Instinctively, I pulled my phone from my pocket, its dim light illuminating a narrow path ahead. The beam danced across the leaves, revealing nothing but more corn, but I felt the certainty that I was not alone. I turned, peering over my shoulder into the narrowing passage I had just walked. The maze seemed to shift around me, the rows rearranging, guiding me deeper into its depths. Panic fluttered in my chest as I recalled the stories that spoke of lost souls, wandering the fields for eternity. I took a few more steps, listening for the reassuring sounds of the farm, but all I could hear was the relentless rhythm of my own heart. Then I heard it, a soft, distinct thump that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It came from my right, deeper within the rows. I hesitated, torn between my desire to flee and an inexplicable urge to investigate. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the sound, drawn by the same ominous curiosity that had led me into the maze in the first place. As I approached, the thumping grew louder, more pronounced. It echoed through the maze, resonating in my bones. I rounded a corner, and there, at the center of a small clearing surrounded by towering stalks, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a wooden crate, half buried beneath the earth, covered in dirt and rot. The thumping was unmistakable now. It came from inside the crate, a rhythmic pounding that sent panic coursing through me. I stepped closer, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to know what was inside. I knelt down beside the crate, brushing off the dirt with trembling hands. The wood was splintered and weathered, as if it had been there for years. My breath quickened as I noticed strange symbols carved into the side, marks I did not recognize but felt compelled to study. Suddenly, the thumping stopped. Silence enveloped me like a shroud, and I froze, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of my heart. The stillness was oppressive, and dread coiled tightly in my stomach. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the corn. Alone, I was vulnerable, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the farm's haunted history pressing down upon me. Against my better judgment, I made the decision. I needed to see what was inside the crate. With a deep breath, I pried open the lid, the creaking sound echoing like a death knell. The darkness inside was thick and suffocating, and I hesitated, looking around for anything that might betray my next move. But curiosity outweighed my fear. As I peered inside, my stomach twisted in revulsion. A jumble of old farming tools lay haphazardly at the bottom, rusted shovels, broken tines, and something else, something that looked like dark, matted hair. I recoiled, nausea twisting in my gut. Just as I was about to slam the lid shut, something shifted beneath the tools. It was small, almost indistinguishable among the debris. I leaned closer, squinting into the darkness, and then I saw it. A small hand, pale and fragile, reached upward, fingers outstretched as if begging for help. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, the weight of the moment crashing down upon me. The tales of the haunted farm, the lost souls, they surged back to life in my mind. I had come to uncover the truth, and now I was face to face with something far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. I turned to run, the shadows of the maze closing in around me as I sprinted back the way I came. The thumping resumed, echoing like a heartbeat, a dark promise that I had disturbed something best left forgotten. With my heart in my throat, I pushed through the corn, desperate to escape the suffocating grasp of the maze and the horrors buried within. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. I stood at the edge of the corn rows, the rustling leaves whispering secrets I dared not unravel. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something sweeter, syrupy and cloying, that turned my stomach. I had spent the day wrestling with the memories of the previous night, the way the shadows had danced in the pale beam of my flashlight, the eerie silence that had settled over the farm like a heavy shroud. My brother Jake had gone into town early that morning to fetch supplies, I welcomed the solitude. While he was away, I thought I could muster the courage to explore the barn, the heart of my unease ever since I had arrived. It loomed over the landscape, its wooden beams weathered by years, a relic from a time when it had thrived with laughter and life. Now it stood as a mausoleum of sorts, a repository for the ghosts of my family's past. As I made my way towards the barn, the sun had begun its descent, and the shadows deepened. Every step felt like a quiet confrontation with the weight of memories. My parents had passed when I was just a child, their absence more pronounced here, in the very walls that once sheltered us. I recalled the stories Jake had told me, tales of the strange happenings that had plagued our family, how our ancestors had whispered of curses and hauntings. I had always brushed them off as fanciful tales, but the atmosphere of the farm had a way of shifting my skepticism. The barn door creaked open like a groan, and I hesitated on the threshold. Light from my flashlight flickered across the hay-strewn floor, illuminating dark corners that seemed to retreat from the beam. The air inside was stale, a blend of mustiness and the faintest hint of decay. I stepped in, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight, and the door swung shut with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. As I scanned the interior, I noticed the remnants of our family's once boisterous life, rusted tools hanging from the walls, a tractor long since abandoned, and precarious stacks of hay bales. Oddly, everything felt untouched yet burdened with the weight of years. I noticed a strange outline against the far wall, draped in a dusty canvas. Curiosity gnawed at me, a relentless urge to uncover whatever lay hidden beneath. I approached it slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the canvas, I hesitated, my heartbeat quickening in rhythm with the creeping dread that wrapped around me. I pulled the cloth away, and a thick cloud of dust erupted into the air, swirling around me like a spectral fog. Beneath the fabric lay an old wooden crate, its surface scarred and stained. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, releasing a musty odor that made my stomach churn. Inside, I found an assortment of items, faded photographs, brittle letters, and a small wooden toy, a cow with one eye missing. I picked up the toy, feeling its weight in my hand as a wave of nostalgia washed over me. But it was the photographs that arrested my attention. A family portrait, faces smiling broadly, next to it, a snapshot of a tall, dark figure lurking in the background, barely discernible but undeniably unsettling. I felt my breath hitch as I studied it closer. The figure seemed out of place, overshadowing the joy of that day. The barn was suddenly far too quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. I turned to leave, heart hammering in my chest, but something caught my eye, a faint sound, like a whisper, rustling through the hay. I paused, straining to hear. The voice was almost human, a soft plea that twisted into a wail, echoing within the confines of the barn. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my feet remained rooted to the spot. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quaking. The silence swallowed my words, and the whisper returned, more urgent. I stepped back, my heart thudding, and nearly collided with the crate. My eyes darted around the barn, searching for the source. It felt as though the walls themselves were alive, pulsating with a hidden energy that both terrified and beckoned me closer. I stumbled back towards the door, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere. As I pushed it open, a chill swept through the barn, snuffing out my flashlight. Darkness enveloped me, and I felt my breath quicken. I fumbled for my phone, the cold panic tightening its grip around my throat. The screen flickered to life, illuminating my surroundings just enough to catch a glimpse of something moving in the far corner. A figure, indistinct and ethereal, seemed to linger in the shadows. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the echo of a laugh that chilled me to the bone. I bolted out into the night, the door slamming shut behind me. The air outside felt more alive than ever, crackling with an energy I could not comprehend, as I fell to my knees in the grass, gasping for breath. In the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel. My heart sank as I realized I was not alone. The laughter returned, taunting and gleeful, wrapping itself around me like a noose. I turned to face the darkness behind me, praying that the shadows would not reveal their true nature. I had come seeking answers, but I was beginning to understand that some truths were better left buried. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows across the dilapidated barn. I had been alone on this forsaken farm for 3 nights now, and each night the feeling of being watched crept deeper into my bones. The quiet hum of insects filled the air, but they felt different, as though they were whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I had come for solitude, an escape from the cacophony of city life, but I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare. That evening, I pushed through the heavy door of the barn, the wood groaning in protest. Dust motes danced in the fading light, settling like memories in the air. I had been searching for anything of value, old tools, remnants of a life that had been. My fingers brushed over rusty machinery and shattered glass, remnants of the past that littered the floor. As I rummaged through the junk, a foul stench wafted toward me, acrid and putrid. I recoiled, slipping on the uneven floor. My heart raced as I steadied myself, scanning the dim corners of the barn. In the far corner, something glinted, a flash of something metallic obscured by shadows. I felt an irrational pull toward it, a compulsion to uncover the truth hidden within the dark. My footsteps echoed as I approached, my breath hitching in my throat. As I reached the object, I discovered a rusting tool, its handle twisted and splintered. But it was what lay beside it that made my stomach churn. A small, tattered journal lay half buried in the hay, its cover stained dark with age. I picked it up, the pages fragile in my grip. I brushed off the dust and opened it. The ink was faded but legible, a man's scrawl that grew more frantic with each page. The entries spoke of strange occurrences, livestock acting restless, shadows flitting at the edges of vision, and a growing dread that settled over the farm like a suffocating fog. My heart thudded loudly as I read the last entry, written just a week before something had driven the man to insanity. The whispers come from the fields. They call to me in the night. I fear I am losing my mind. If anyone finds this, do not stay. The farm is cursed. I slammed the journal shut, the echo of the clap reverberating through the barn like a warning bell. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to pack up my belongings and flee. Yet, as I turned to leave, I was met with a chill that settled on my spine. The air felt electric, charged with something far more sinister than fear. The door creaked open behind me, and I spun around. Shadows flitted across the threshold, darting in and out of the fading light. Were they even shadows? I couldn't tell. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I was no longer alone. Something breathed in the darkness, something that lurked just out of sight, and I could sense its hunger. I stumbled away from the door, my mind racing. I had to get out, had to escape before it found me. Just as I turned to make my way toward the exit, a low growl emanated from the shadows, rumbling like thunder. I froze, my pulse quickening. The darkness seemed to undulate, taking form as the growl deepened into a series of guttural sounds that echoed menacingly in the barn. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it couldn't hear me. I had to calm myself, to think. I grabbed the journal and made a break for the door, but as I reached for the handle, a cold wind gusted through the barn, slamming the door shut with a deafening bang. The sound reverberated through the space, and I leaped back, my heart racing. The growling intensified, now punctuated by scratching, as though claws scraped against the wooden beams. Panic surged within me, and I turned, darting deeper into the barn, searching for a place to hide. My eyes scanned frantically, landing on an old loft above me. With no time to weigh the danger, I lunged for the rickety ladder and climbed, the wood creaking ominously under my weight. Once in the loft, I curled into a corner, clutching the journal to my chest. I could see the dark shape below, shifting, sniffing the air, a silhouette that resembled something once familiar, a dog, but twisted and grotesque, with fur matted and stained, eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. It prowled, searching, its growls echoing in the silence. God, please, I muttered over and over, clutching the edges of the loft. I barely dared to breathe as I watched the creature circle the barn, its movements restless, like it was drawn by an invisible string. The shadows danced, more alive than before, playing tricks on my eyes. Paranoia clawed at my mind. Then, as if sensing my presence, the creature stopped. Its head snapped up, and for a moment, its glowing eyes met mine. Time stretched, and eternity caught in that single glance. In that instant, I felt raw terror wash over me, a realization that whatever this thing was, it wasn't meant to be here. It had been conjured by the dark history of the farm, a guardian or tormentor, born of whispers and dread. Suddenly, it lunged, crashing into the wooden supports of the barn. The structure groaned as the creature's frenzy escalated. I clung to the journal, my lifeline, and prepared for what might come next. If I was to survive, I had to confront the horrors that festered here, buried beneath the weight of despair and time. In that moment, I no longer wanted to run. I wanted to understand. But as the barn trembled and the creature's growls filled my ears, I had to wonder how much of this dark legacy could I unravel before it unraveled me. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the fields. The cool evening air whispered through the corn stalks, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something sour that twisted my stomach. After the events of the previous night, I found it hard to shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin. Every rustle in the wind sent my heart racing, reminding me of the horror I had yet to fully comprehend. I sat on the porch, the wood creaking beneath me in a way that seemed almost alive. The old farmhouse had its character, but tonight it felt more like a tomb. I could hear my uncle, Harold, in the barn, muttering to himself as he tended to the animals. His voice was low, almost reverent, and I couldn't help but feel that he spoke to them not just out of necessity but as if they were a congregation, listening to a sermon only he could comprehend. With every passing moment, the shadows grew longer, and I felt the oppressive weight of night creeping in. I recalled the way the farmhouse had felt when I first arrived, rustic, quaint, a slice of rural life untouched by the outside world. But now, I saw its peeling paint as more than just neglect. It felt like a warning, like the walls were closing in on me. I caught a glimpse of movement in the distance. A figure darted between the rows of crops, hunched and quick, a trick of the fading light, perhaps. My heart raced as I forced myself to blink, but the shadow remained. It wasn't the first time I'd seen something out of the corner of my eye this week, but each occurrence seemed to solidify the unease gnawing in my insides. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the chill that had settled into my bones. "Hey, kid. Get over here." Harold's voice boomed from the barn, breaking my reverie. The urgency in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I stood, wiping my palms on my jeans, and made my way toward the barn. Each step was heavy with foreboding, as if the ground itself was hesitant to let me pass. Upon entering the barn, the smell of hay and manure hit me like a wall. It was dimly lit, illuminated by a single overhead bulb that flickered intermittently. My uncle was crouched beside one of the stalls, his back to me. The cows shifted uneasily, their low moos a stark contrast to the tension thick in the air. "Something's wrong," he muttered without looking up. "The goats aren't coming back." My stomach dropped. I had seen the goats earlier, frolicking in the yard, but they had since vanished, their absence unnerving. "What do you mean?" "They just left." He turned, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Not just left. They were taken. I can feel it in my bones." I stepped closer, scanning the shadows for any sign of the animals. "Taken? By what?" Harold gripped the edge of the stall, his knuckles white. I don't know. But if we don't find them soon, there'll be hell to pay. A gust of wind rattled the barn door, and I shivered. I could sense an unseen presence lurking, just out of sight. I looked at the horses, their eyes wide and frantic, as if they too could sense something we couldn't. We can't just wait here, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. We have to look for them. Harold hesitated, his mind clearly battling between the fear of the unknown and the duty to protect the farm. Finally, he nodded, the decision made. All right. We'll split up. You take the south field, I'll head toward the woods. A surge of anxiety bubbled inside me. The woods? Are you sure that's wise? I'm sure of one thing, he said, his voice low and grim. We can't let whatever did this get away. Reluctantly, I agreed, my pulse thrumming in my ears as I stepped back out into the eerie twilight. The outside world felt more alien than ever. The vibrant greens and yellows of the fields had dulled, muted under the encroaching darkness. Each step seemed to echo, taunting me, daring me to turn back. As I walked toward the south field, I could feel the weight of the silence pressing on me. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were suspiciously absent. Goosebumps pricked my skin, and I found myself peering into the shadows, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back. A rustle broke the stillness. Instinctively, I turned toward the sound, my heart racing anew. It came from the edge of the field, where the corn stalks swayed as if something had passed through them. Hello? I called, my voice shaking. No answer, only the wind whispering ominously through the rows. I hesitated, then pressed on, moving deeper into the field. The shadows loomed like specters, and the corn, tall and thick, closed in around me. I felt lost, disconnected from the safety of the barn and my uncle's presence. A low, guttural sound rumbled nearby, sending shockwaves of fear coursing through me. It was unlike anything I had heard before, a sound that twisted in my gut, primal and feral. I stopped, heart pounding, and listened intently. Then I saw it, a figure, crouched down, silhouetted against the darkening sky. My breath caught in my throat as I took a hesitant step back. Is someone there? The figure turned, revealing a face obscured by shadows, but not before I caught a glimpse of its wide, unnatural grin. The blood drained from my face as it lunged toward me. Panic ignited in my veins as I spun on my heel and ran, stumbling through the cornfield, the stalks grabbing at my clothes. I couldn't think, only run, driven by the primal instinct to survive. I heard it behind me, crashing through the crops, and I pushed myself harder, desperation fueling my flight. I needed to reach the safety of the barn. I needed to find Harold. As I burst from the edge of the field, gasping for air, I collided with something solid. I stumbled back, my heart in my throat, only to realize it was Harold, pale and wild-eyed, his expression mirroring my own terror. What happened? He demanded, grabbing my shoulders. I saw something. My words tumbled out in a breathless rush. Something in the corn. We have to get inside. Now! Before I could fully comprehend the gravity of the situation, the barn door creaked ominously, swinging open behind us. In that moment, everything shifted. The darkness that had encroached upon our lives felt alive, hungry, as the true horror of our farm began to unfurl.